Chapter 1. Another extension? The card I gave you had a very high limit. How could you have blown through so much money so quickly? Vincent murmured at the end of the table, wishing the coffee he sipped was Irish. A little Bailey's would ease the headache his fiancée, a word he used ironically, was causing with her nagging, a regular occurrence when the two of them shared a room. "I'm sorry, Vincent, but I can't keep up with the lifestyle you expect me to maintain if I can't go shopping," Gemma growled, her arms crossed over her chest. "I have never asked you to maintain any lifestyle, Gemma. You told yourself that. I will not extend the credit again, nor will I pay the debt accrued by you on a different card. You are out of luck." Gemma stared at him, her eyes narrowed as she furiously paced in front of the table where he sat sipping his coffee. She slammed her hands on the end of the table to get his attention and huffed when he glanced up and back down almost as quickly. "When I agreed to this damn marriage, I was given the impression that money was no object. If I wanted to shop, I could shop. Whenever I wanted, wherever I wanted, and with your money." She emphasized her words by slamming her hand into her palm. "I didn't agree to this marriage. It was forced on me by my mother, who made promises to you, not me. Go ask her for more money. I will not give you a cent more." Vincent sipped his coffee and returned to his iPad, where he read the NY Times every morning. He could feel her glare but refused to look up at her until her voice interrupted his reading. "Vincent, that was a mean thing to say. I'm sorry you don't want to marry me, but we don't have much choice, do we? The lion shifters are becoming extinct. If you want to be king, you have to get married. I'm the closest person to your age on this side of the country, so we'll just have to make the best of it." "Making the best of it isn't going broke so you can buy a new outfit for every day of the week," Vincent told her, glaring at her over his iPad. "Aren't you a model? That's what I was told when my mother forced me into this charade of a relationship. Use your own damn money. I put my career on hold so I could focus on our wedding." "Take it off hold. I'll have my mother plan the wedding." "No one is planning my wedding but me, you ass," Gemma yelled at him. "And besides, you're a billionaire, aren't you? Or was that another lie to rope me into marrying you?" "My worth isn't your concern, Gemma, and you weren't roped into this marriage. You jumped at the chance to marry a billionaire." He looked her up and down, not without revulsion. "I feel like I should be 90 since you're so obviously only in this for money," she sputtered, her speech a jumble of unintelligible words. "You bastard! How dare you accuse me of being a gold digger?" He pointed at her, baiting her. "I called you nothing of the sort. You're putting words in my mouth." She glared at him, her eyes almost flaming in anger. He could plainly see her desire to shift and attack him. She played her last card. "Maybe I'll call your mother and tell her I refuse to marry you. I'll call off the wedding." Vincent raised an eyebrow at her. "I've tried, Gemma, believe me. The queen of our people, my glorious mother, won't hear it. If you can convince her, by all means call. Maybe she'll listen to you and we'll be free. Good luck. You're supposed to be the prince of lion shifters, respected, revered, and loved by our people." She sneered and pointed her finger accusingly at him. Her red nails were long and looked as if they could rip his face off with very little effort. "If they only knew the real you, Vincent, they'd beg your mother to appoint someone else to be our king when she is gone. I would thank the gods if someone else were chosen to be king. I have a life to live, and it doesn't include dealing with pitiful disputes between haggard lion shifters who live outside the law." Calmly, he sipped his coffee, looking at her over the rim, which he knew would drive her insane. "Look what's happened to you," she taunted, loathing in her tone. He had heard it before and would hear it again. Her cattiness and insults held no power over him. "You're barely even a lion anymore, Vincent. You spend too much time with those damn humans. They've ruined you, made you like them," she said, a smug smile on her face. "Better a human than a spoiled bitch who doesn't know how to take care of herself. Admit it. If I found a way to end this engagement and tossed you out on your ass, you'd have nowhere to go," Vincent said cruelly. Gemma's lip quivered and her eyes pooled. You son of a bitch! I am that, Gemma. You've called my mother that numerous times. Vincent rose and straightened his tie. He shrugged his jacket over his large shoulders and barrel chest and looked at her. And don't pretend to cry, it doesn't work. Never has because you're such a heartless dick. And I have friends, you ass. I have plenty of places to go. Gemma screamed at him. Her hands gripped the edge of the table. Vincent wondered if she'd break the end off in her hands. Lion shifters were known for extreme strength, especially when angry. Rather than calm her, he goaded her further. None of them will hand you a credit card. Vincent frowned down at his phone as he read a text. He looked at her, at the hatred so plain on her face. Gotta go. Today you should work on finding another modeling job. You'll need a paycheck if you want to go shopping anytime soon. What about my wedding dress? If I have my way, you won't need it. Fuck you! She screamed. She yanked a bowl off the table and lobbed it at his head. He moved to the side and listened to it shatter against the wall behind him. Nice arm. Maybe you should try baseball instead of modeling. He walked out of the room, listening to her screaming obscenities at him. His mother would receive another phone call this evening if she didn't call him first after Gemma told on him. He would not spend his life saddled with a psychotic shifter, and he sure as hell wouldn't have children with her. The idea of fucking her was nearly vomit-inducing. Gemma's blonde, wild hair, long limbs, tanned skin, and golden eyes were a photographer's dream. Her toned body was muscular without being manly, and she maintained that body by working out 3 times a day, an hour each time. However, her beauty had been marred from day one. He had seen right through her when she'd treated his best friend like a servant. Though he'd been initially attracted to her, after their first meeting, the attraction had dissipated. They hadn't even kissed, and they'd been engaged for 2 months. The text that had so fortuitously interrupted the argument had been from the head gardener, a marvelous distraction from his life with Gemma and the stress that caused. They fought almost every day, so Vincent was grateful for anything that removed him from the house. His house. That pissed him off more than anything. The gardener needed his opinion on the private sanctuary Vincent was having built on the grounds. His private sanctuary for no one to enter but himself. As he walked, he checked the various gardens, certain the plants were well cared for by the patrol of gardeners he'd hired. He chuckled. He and Gemma had fought over the fact that he had 5 gardeners employed on his grounds, but no chef. Gemma had wanted to hire a chef the moment she'd moved in, but he had refused. The woman who had been his nanny as a child lived with him and still cooked his meals when he wanted one. He refused to have anyone but her in his kitchen. Gemma had thrown a fit, but once she'd tasted Mel's cooking, she had agreed to drop it. At the center of the grounds, a decorative fence created a haven of solitude and peace for Vincent. The fence was wrought iron and painted black. Just inside the fence, a huge array of trees and bushes hid the interior of the sanctuary from the eyes of anyone without a key. Only Vincent and the head gardener had a key, and the man had created a schedule so that he never interrupted Vincent if he wanted to be alone. The sanctuary had taken over a year to complete, and Vincent was ready to put the final touches. The pool was now complete, and just yesterday, the seating area he had designed himself had been completed. 2 hammocks hung from large trees that shaded the pool, and 2 lounging chairs sat across if he should wish to sit in the sun. When he had conceived the idea of the sitting area, he had put in 2 of everything, hoping to share this place with his wife. That wouldn't be happening anytime soon. Although the nature sanctuary was complete, mostly, the gardener had warned Vincent, "It's never really complete, you know. It's filled with living organisms who have minds of their own. Without proper maintenance, your sanctuary will become an unmanageable jungle rather than the peaceful retreat you wish it to be." Vincent had understood. The man loved the sanctuary as much as he did, and lavished that love on the place daily. He knew how to properly care for each individual plant, even the most exotic. The plethora of colorful flowers, the abundance of leafy trees and plants, and the clear blue pool in the center stole the stress of any day, stress of any kind, and released it into the air. The stress of living with such a hateful creature evaporated when Vincent stepped through the gate. He called out to Pierre, the head gardener, and waited for the response before heading in a particular direction. The sanctuary was as large as half a football field with the visibility of a lush rainforest. Wandering around looking for someone without a location was futile. "Good morning, Pierre," Vincent said quietly, patting the man on the shoulder. He and Pierre always spoke quietly in the sanctuary, their voices hushed by the beauty of the place. "Ah, hello, young Vincent," Pierre greeted him in his slight French accent. "I hope I did not interrupt your breakfast." "Thank you for interrupting," Vincent murmured with a frown. Pierre matched his frown, understanding on his face and in his eyes. "Let me ease your mind with beauty," he said in place of an apology for circumstances that were in no way his fault. He wiggled his gray, bushy eyebrows at Vincent. "You will love the new addition. Follow me." Pierre led him to a corner he had turned into a pretend desert with sand, rocks, and cacti mixed. A flowering cacti caught Vincent's eyes immediately, and he knelt before it with Pierre. "Ah, I knew you would see it without my direction," Pierre claimed happily, clapping his hands together and rubbing them with glee. "This is called Cacticoeur Solea, a beautiful flowering cactus that will add such wonderful, vibrant colors to our faux desert. I have planted 3 of various sizes, you see." "It's lovely, Pierre," Vincent told him, the smile on his face genuine. He found true happiness in nature. "When you have children, and they have children, these cacti will tower over them," Pierre exclaimed joyfully, laughing at the idea. "They grow very slowly, but they flower annually. You will find great joy here over the years." Vincent had lost a tad of his happiness. Children? No thanks, he thought, especially not with that evil vixen his mother had chosen for him. He didn't let Pierre see the ire in his eyes. He rose and patted the old man on the back. "Beautiful addition, as usual, Pierre. I can always trust you." Vincent's phone buzzed in his pocket. His mother. He ignored the call, refusing to allow the ugliness he was sure would happen into his sanctuary. "I'll be home this evening, and will, hopefully, be enjoying the majority of it out here." "Splendid! The seating area near the pool is finally complete, and if you wish, you can swim in the pool. It is filtered, as requested." "Thank you, Pierre," Vincent said, truly grateful for the old man's hard work. "I have to go join the real world now, though I wish I could stay here." The old man laughed, slapping his knee as he rose to walk Vincent to the gate. "Young man, I would stay here as well. Hope your day gets better." "Thank you, Pierre. If not today, then tonight while I'm out here, I will make it better." "That's a good outlook," Pierre told him as Vincent reluctantly exited and headed for the front of the house. He dialed a number on his phone. "Butch, please bring the car around. I'll be there momentarily." His head of security, an ex-boxer who was also a lion shifter, had been his friend since childhood. He was also Mel's only son. More than an employee, he was Vincent's right-hand man and knew everything about Vincent's life, including his disastrous engagement to the Beast, as Butch referred to her. "Your voice tells me it's been a hell of a morning already," Butch said into the phone. "Yes, not surprising." "Not at all. I'll grab a couple of Bloody Marys for the road, friend. John will have the car out front in 5. "Perfect. I'll be coming from the side of the house. I prefer not to walk through and run the risk of another bout with the feline fatale." He hung up, listening to Butch's laughter echo through the phone line. His phone buzzed again, and hoping Butch had forgotten to tell him something, he glanced at the screen. His mother. He sighed and answered the phone. If he continued to ignore her, she'd make his life hell when he did speak to her. "Hi, Mom." "Hello, Vincent. I'm sure you know why I'm calling," his mother intoned. She, too, was sick of Gemma and her theatrics, though she still insisted on this engagement. Yes, Gemma called. I was cruel to her, said awful, terrible things, and threatened to end our relationship. Does that cover everything? Vincent asked, a smirk on his face. You forgot to mention you took away her credit card, his mother informed him. Mother, she maxed out the credit card and wanted another. I refused. And while we're on the subject of refusing, I want out of this marriage. She's a horrible, spoiled bitch. And honestly, I think she may be in serious need of antipsychotic medication. His mother chuckled. I've always enjoyed your sense of humor, Vincent. But you can't get out of this marriage. If you'll get her pregnant and have a baby, I'll let you divorce her. She won't want to raise that baby. We can pay her off and you and I can raise the child, Elaine reasoned. Mother, that's awful and you know it. Oh, son, you know I only half mean it. He wondered if she half meant it. His mother could be cold-hearted sometimes, especially when her son or her people were involved. Well, I all the way mean it. I am not marrying that woman. Elaine sighed. Vincent could hear the frown on her face. Vincent, we've been through this. You must marry. You're to become the lion shifter king after I retire. You need a bride so you can continue our name and our rule. Mother, any child that woman has will be a raging lunatic, no matter who she copulates with nor how good his genes are, Vincent told her. I won't marry her. You sound like a broken record. Break the wedding off. Vincent. Elaine had shifted her tone from mother to queen in a flash. His name sounded like a command. You will marry that girl. She is the only lion shifter anywhere near your age in this part of the country. I've started the wedding plans already. Plan all you want, Mother. When the blessed day arrives, I won't be there. You make the decision. Call it off or suffer the humiliation when I don't show up, Vincent said, anger tearing through his voice. Damn it, Vincent, you made a promise, his mother countered, her own anger causing her to lose the queenly manner. This isn't a choice you get to make. Mother, we do not live in the Middle Ages. Arranged marriages are a thing of the past. True, but you can have your kingship stripped. I will choose someone else to be the king, Elaine threw out. I know that's a lie. You want me to be king more than you want me to be married. And you know I don't care if I'm king. I enjoy the life I live outside the shifter culture. Elaine growled deep in her throat as she contemplated her answer. I will be paying you and Gemma a visit soon, by early next week, if by the end of my visit the three of us can't come to an agreement. I'll consider letting you out of this marriage. Mother, you're not listening. I will not marry that woman. He punctuated each word more loudly than the one before. There is no agreement to come to. I'm telling her tonight to pack her shit. Watch your language, she said, though without heat. Yes, Mother, Vincent told her as he headed for the car. Butch raised his eyebrows at him, and Vincent rolled his eyes. Don't waste your time coming here. I won't change my mind. Don't kick her out yet, Vincent. I may not be able to mend this relationship, but I'd prefer the poor girl not be on the streets. I'll put her on a plane to you then, Vincent said. No, you will not, Elaine replied hastily. You don't like her either, Vincent accused. I don't have to marry her, she said with a laugh. Neither do I, if my guess is correct, Vincent said, sensing his mother's firmness wavering. Elaine sighed. She had known the moment she'd met Gemma that her son wouldn't get along with her, but she wanted this marriage to work. She wanted her son to be the king. The lion shifters wouldn't accept him without a wife by his side. She also knew Vincent meant it when he said he didn't want to be the king. Her dilemmas grew. Damn, my life gets harder every time I talk to you, Elaine muttered. I'll be there next week. If you want her to leave, at least get her a hotel room until I get there. Mother, the girl has her own money. She just prefers to spend mine, Vincent reminded her. Yes, but why make this stink more than it already does? I'll see you next week, Elaine said. Love you, Mom, Vincent replied, reverting to the more casual name now that they were no longer arguing. He ended the call and looked at Butch, who was waiting in the car. He slid into the back seat beside him. "Good morning, John." "Good morning, sir. Office?" "Yes, please." Vincent reached for the Bloody Mary Butch held out to him. He gulped half before he leaned back to relax. "Tough morning?" Butch asked, smirking. "You have no idea, and I would prefer not to. So what's happening?" "I think my mother may let me out of this disaster she calls an engagement," Vincent informed him. "Really?" Butch mused. "That's a good thing, right?" "Yes, but she's visiting next week to discuss." "Oh, no." Butch understood that although Elaine had seemed to relent, if she was visiting, she had something up her sleeve. "And she asked me not to kick Gemma out, or if I do, pay for her hotel." "Oh, Lord, you know she'll pick the most expensive one in town and run up a huge room service bill," Butch grumbled. "I do know that. Gods, why can't the damn woman walk out? I treat her like shit." Vincent's voice had raised so much that John glanced in the rearview mirror at him. "Money, my friend. You're just too damn rich," Butch told him with a laugh. "Shut up and eat your celery," Vincent growled as he bit into his own vodka-soaked celery.
Chapter 2. How am I going to make rent this month? A girl has to eat. Danae Marcellus sat at her tiny table in her tiny kitchen, munching on a piece of toast slathered in grape jelly. The coffee she'd made was watered down, so what little was left in the can would last until payday. She'd have good coffee at the office. She looked at her phone as she accessed her account, then sighed loudly around the toast in her mouth. "Damn it," she mumbled. Her cat, Jody, jumped onto the table and mewed at her, rubbing her head against the hand holding her coffee mug. Danae smiled at her, put her mug down, and rubbed her head gently, so she'd go without meat for a few days at the end of payday. Her baby had needed medical care after her paw was broken by a mousetrap laid by the maintenance men under her sink. And vets don't do payment plans. She'd had to pay up front. Her bank account wasn't empty, and her subway fare was paid up through the month. She'd be able to get to work, and if she was frugal, she could have decent meals in the evenings. For the millionth time, she mourned the fact that she couldn't keep any money in her savings account because of the student loans she'd accrued getting a degree she didn't even use. Sociology? Really? She wished she'd listened to her mother, though she'd never admit it. A sociology degree without master's and doctoral degrees was completely useless. Oh well, she thought as she rose and gathered her bag and lunch and headed for the door. It would get better. She was only 26 and had been out of college for 4 years. She was still young, had plenty of time to worry about a savings account later. Her job, which she loved, paid well. Eventually, when she'd paid off the student loans, she'd be in a good place. Danae locked the door and headed down the 2 flights of stairs. When she'd first moved in, she'd liked the fact that the building had no elevator. Added to the charm of the old building, and it was forced daily exercise, she'd thought. Now she hated it and complained internally almost every day when she got home. The 3-block hike to and from the subway was enough exercise as far as she was concerned. She was grateful for the small mom-and-pop market between her apartment building and the subway. Saved her the extra steps. When she reached the subway steps, she meandered down. She always left with more than enough time to get to work. She arrived at least 20 minutes early every day. And even though she lived in the big city, she saw a lot of the same people on the train each morning. People were creatures of habit. She rode on the same car of the same train Monday through Friday every week. As she climbed on, she looked around. She'd made up stories for the people she saw daily. There was the teenager in a trench coat, his greasy hair slicked back and his dark sunglasses hiding his eyes. Danae was sure he studied the passengers each day, as if searching for weaknesses he could exploit in the basement he'd converted into a torture chamber, reminiscent of the Spanish Inquisition. Across from him, as always, was a young woman in heavy makeup and a different wig for each day, exhausted from her midnight shift at one of the higher-end strip clubs on the east side. Every morning, she leaned back against the seat, snoozing with her eyes open. To her left was the old man who rode only on Mondays and Fridays. He wore a faded suit under an old overcoat. He carried a bouquet of flowers close to his chest as if protecting them from some unseen enemy. Danai imagined he carried them to his elderly girlfriend who lived across town, and the two of them would spend the day together. She recognized others, avoided some, and chatted with few. Avoiding the pervert who hit on her each day was becoming impossible. She was afraid she'd have to change train cars if he didn't take the hint soon. He'd only been riding for a few weeks, but he was a nuisance, flirting mercilessly even if she was rude. Today was no different. As soon as he climbed on the train, one stop away from hers, he looked for her and moved to stand next to her. "Good morning, hot stuff. How's your morning?" "Hello?" she replied coldly, staring at her phone as if mesmerized by the Facebook profile on the screen. Danai was used to men flirting with her. She'd been told by many she was a beauty, and not just men who wanted to take her to bed. She could see the loveliness when she looked in the mirror, but it had no effect on her behavior. Her caramel skin, flawless as if her face were a painting, was framed by perfectly curly hair. She wore short in a Halle Berry haircut that flattered her bone structure. When asked for a description of herself, she said she was curvy with more curves than a curvy California road. Her bountiful breasts, full thighs, and ass that never quit until she wanted it to, attracted more men than a bar advertising free beer. Her looks had certainly attracted Creeper Dude, as she referred to him. It wasn't her personality, she was sure of that. She mumbled incoherently at him, if she answered him at all. Creeper Dude leaned in close, so close she could feel his breath, minty fresh, on her cheek. "So, babe, when you gonna let me take you out to dinner? When you learn proper grammar?" Her voice was like ice. He didn't even notice. "Damn, I do love a woman with some sass. Come on, babe," he said as he put his arm around her waist. "Let me love you." Danai's skin literally crawled. She stepped away from him so his arm fell away. No touching. When he reached for her again, she grabbed his wrist and bent it back like she'd learned in a woman's defense class she'd taken. He yelped and froze. In a higher-pitched voice, he squealed, "What the fuck, bitch?" "Do not put your hands on a woman who has told you no," Danai hissed at him, her face inches from his. He brought his other arm around as if to grab her, and she increased the pressure on his wrist. He dropped to one knee. "God damn it, let me go, bitch!" "Are you going to touch me again?" "Fuck you!" She increased the pressure until he squeaked. "Fine! No! Now let me go!" She released his wrist and shoved his forehead so that he landed back on his ass. She glared down at him. "No means no, asshole. Don't come near me again or I'll snap your wrist like a twig, we clear?" Creeper Dude stood. Danai waited, holding her breath, terrified he might hit her. But he looked around, frowning at all the people looking at him, turned, and went through the walk through to the next car. Danai returned to her position near the door, holding onto the bar above her head. The teenager's expression hadn't changed. The stripper winked at her, and the old man smiled and gave her a thumbs up. She was sure at least one of them, probably the stripper, would have stepped forward had he actually struck her. With nowhere for her adrenaline to go, her hands began to shake, but she didn't care. She was incredibly proud of herself for defending herself. Her financial worries a distant worry. She smiled the rest of the ride to work. "That's fantastic!" Her work best friend Lexi squealed, laughing through her words. "I can't believe you grabbed him like that." "Yeah, well, he's lucky I didn't kick him in the balls. I can't believe he thought that was okay," Danai murmured, shaking her head. She reached around Lexi for a coffee cup. "I mean, seriously, what an ass." "Ass is a kind word, I think," Lexi commented as she added cream and sugar to her cup. "Guess he won't be bothering you anymore." "He damn well better not," Danai laughed. "That class I took was well worth the money. Why did you take that class anyway?" "My dad was worried about me in the big city." "Ah, dads, they're the best, right?" "Yep." Danai was incredibly close with her father, considering her mother had left when she was 12 and had never come back. She'd been raised by her father and her grandmother. She really didn't have much of a memory of her mother anymore. "Gotta go," Lexi told her. "Calvin has a meeting first thing and wants me present to take notes." She rolled her eyes dramatically. Danae chuckled and waved, then sipped her first good sip of coffee that morning. Lexi and she worked in similar positions as assistants to marketing executives, but Danae was lucky with the boss she'd been given. Soft-spoken, kind, and interested in helping Danae further her own career, Bill Thompson was the coveted marketing exec among the secretary pool. Lexi, on the other hand, was stuck with Calvin Foster, a needy, self-involved idea thief. But he did take good care of Lexi, making sure she received bonuses for the extra hours she put in. Danae hurried to her desk when she heard the phone ringing, and she began her very busy day. She either stayed on the phone or was speaking to someone for 2 solid hours, barely having the time to go to the bathroom or fill her to-go cup with water from the cooler. When she returned to her desk, her boss was waiting for her. "Busy morning, Danae," he commented as she rushed to answer the phone again. He waited while she finished with the call, his wrinkles deepened by the grin on his face. The man was at least 60 and could have retired 5 years before, but he loved his job and was better at it than most. As she hung up the phone, she wiped pretend sweat off her brow and looked at her boss. Busy indeed. Of course, that may be a massive understatement. "How about a break from your desk?" he asked jovially, smiling at her as he propped his hip on her desk. "I would love to. Would you like me to grab you some lunch?" "Oh no, nothing like that. The missus is heading up for lunch today." "How sweet. You're a lucky man, Mr. Thompson," Danae told him with a smile. She was a little jealous of their 40-year-long marriage and hoped she'd find something that beautiful. "I certainly am, my dear," Mr. Thompson said with a nod. He held a file out to her. "Can you please take this up to the CEO's office? He's asked for it even though I'm pretty sure he's not even here yet." "Ah, to be the big boss," Danae said, her hands on her chest dreamily. They laughed together. "Yes, that is the dream." Mr. Thompson laughed. "He did specifically request them, so get them up there ASAP. I don't want him to get here and that file be missing from his desk." "Of course I can do that. But sir, who will answer the phone?" she asked as it began to ring again. Mr. Thompson chuckled, reminding Danae of a teacher she'd had in high school who she had loved. "I think letting a few of these callers go to voicemail won't hurt anything." "All right. I'll be back in a few minutes." Danae took the file from him and headed for the elevators, thinking to herself that the voicemails would have to be dealt with before she went to lunch. "Take your time, Danae. You work too hard," Mr. Thompson called. She called back. "Learned from you, Mr. Thompson." "Oh, Danae, hold on a minute." He hurried after her, holding out a key card. "Use the elevator on Hall D. It's the only one that goes all the way. You'll need this key card as well." "Thank goodness you stopped me. I would have been very confused." She laughed as she changed directions and headed for Hall D. "Would have been my fault. And don't lose that or we'll both get fired." He winked at her confused expression, and she hoped he was kidding. He waved to her as she walked away. Hall D was really not a hall at all. It was a foyer created just for the elevator that led to the top floor. Few people had the key card to use this elevator. Danae swiped the card and waited for the elevator to reach her floor. She pocketed the key card but kept touching her pocket to make sure it hadn't somehow magically disappeared in the last few seconds. When the doors opened, the elevator wasn't empty as she'd expected. A man looked up at her, irritation plain in his eyes. For a moment, she almost turned and walked away, but he'd already seen her. The CEO, Vincent Wallace. Good Lord, she'd heard rumors that he was so good-looking it hurt, and those rumors were true. "Wow," she mused. "I think my panties just tried to jump off." When he lifted a sculpted eyebrow at her, she put a small smile on her face and stepped inside. "Damn, damn, damn," she repeated over and over in her head. She told herself to remain calm, despite the fact that the man smelled like what she imagined heaven smelled like. And his godlike face mesmerized her, though she kept her eyes on the doors. Chiseled chin, cheeks and brow, full, thick lips, and eyes and hair the color of grain blowing in the wind. I may have an orgasm just standing next to him. The doors closed and the elevator began its ascent. The man had turned his head and was staring at her. She finally looked at him and smiled. He didn't return it. "Who are you?" he asked brusquely. "I work on the 5th floor," Denai explained quietly, leaving out her name accidentally. Bristling just a little at his tone, she thought, good-looking or not, boss of the company or not, he doesn't have to be rude. "This elevator is for supervisors only. You are not one of my supervisors," he replied, still staring at her. When she met his eyes, he didn't look as irritated as his voice sounded. Rather, he looked intrigued by her, as if she were some strange creature he had never laid eyes on before. Frowning, she told him, "My boss, Mr. Thompson, asked me to take this file upstairs to the CEO." "Ah, yes, Mr. Thompson. Is that the file?" He pointed at the manila folder in her hand. "Yes, sir. I guess this is yours, Mr. Wallace," Denai said. She held the file out to him. He reached for it without breaking eye contact, and Denai couldn't take her eyes off him. She felt hypnotized by his eyes, and she didn't mind in the least. His finger brushed hers when he took the file from her, and she actually jolted from the spark she felt. She thought his eyes widened a fraction, but his expression didn't change, so she wasn't sure. The elevator doors dinged and whooshed open, ending the spell. She stared down at her feet as he exited. She remained in the elevator and was pushing for the button for her floor when he looked at her. "Thank you. I didn't get your name," he said to her, watching her eyes as if he were mesmerized by her. Which was crazy. Denai opened her mouth just as the elevator doors whooshed closed. She could have pushed the open doors button but chose not to. The spark she'd felt when their hands had touched had freaked her out. The man was a god as well, and she was pretty sure he was engaged or married or something. Too bad he was rude. She wondered if he was always so rude, or if he was just having a bad day. Either way, she had let the elevator close without telling him her name, and she seriously doubted he would come to the 5th floor to find out. But man, she'd probably dream about him that night, and that was okay with her. Vincent watched the doors closed, his instinct to put his hand between the doors to stop them, but he wasn't fast enough. He hadn't been able to take his eyes off the woman in the elevator. His tone had been rude, he knew, because he hadn't been in the mood to share his elevator with a stranger. But once he'd looked into those brown eyes and registered her creamy brown skin, the color of his morning coffee, he had been mesmerized by her beauty, and her curves made the women in his teenage wet dreams pitiful in comparison. "Damn, I should have stopped that elevator," he grouched to himself as he turned away from the elevator and headed for his office. It was strange to him, though, that she had let the elevator close. Most women who knew who he was would have followed him off the elevator to talk to him. He knew the effect he had on women, and he knew the effect his billions had on women, but she had left without a glance back. Odd. He nodded to his personal secretary, a woman old enough to be his mother. She was first and foremost a professional. She did not believe personal relationships were appropriate at work. He had hired Melinda specifically because she never commented on his affairs, though she knew about everything he did. She halted him with a raised hand. "Mr. Wallace, Mr. Edgars is in your office. He had an appointment at 10 and has been waiting," she told him, the smallest bit of censure in her voice. Vincent always felt as if he were being chastised by his mother when she said things like that. He had probably hired her for that very reason. She kept him in line quietly, which was not like his mother at all. "Thank you, Melinda. I'll make my apologies for being late," he told her with a smile. His looks had no effect on her whatsoever. "Good idea, sir." She sniffed and returned to her computer screen. Her gray hair was in its usual bun and looked so tight he wondered if she could even smile. He'd never seen it. Vincent stepped into his office and looked around for Ross, the Mr. Edgars Melinda had referred to, but he wasn't visible. He heard the water running in his private bathroom and rolled his eyes. His other best friend, who served as his attorney, often took liberties when in his office. Like Melinda, Vincent often wondered who worked for who where Ross was concerned. He moved behind his desk and laid the file on it, then turned to look out the window. His arguments with his fiancée and his mother had vanished from his mind. He was lost in thought over the lovely young woman who had been in the elevator. The view of the city distracted him for a moment. The entire wall behind his desk was made of glass. But those eyes, he couldn't get them out of his mind. She worked on the 5th floor for Bill Thompson. Contrary to the beliefs of most of his employees, he knew every one of his supervisors by name, and he'd always liked Bill. If he'd chosen that woman as his assistant, that meant she was good at her job. And he wanted to know her name.
Chapter 3. Ross stepped out of the bathroom and glanced around. He'd heard Vincent walk in and had wondered why he hadn't called out an insult for being in his private bathroom. Vincent stared out the window behind the desk, his work ignored. Ross sighed. Whatever had caused his mood, Ross was about to hear all about it. "Good morning, Vincent," Ross said jovially, hoping to ease his friend's mood with a little lightheartedness. "Do I ask about Gemma?" he wondered. She was the usual source of Vincent's foul moods. Might as well. "How's Gemma?" "Possibly burning everything I own as we speak," Vincent mumbled without turning around. Ross nodded his head and rolled his eyes. Since their engagement, Vincent spent more time in a bad mood than a good one. "Same old argument?" "Yes." Vincent turned around, a light in his eyes, surprising Ross again. "Except I spoke to my mother about it. She's on the verge of releasing me from this ridiculous marriage, so that's a bright spot in my day. I plan to set that bitch up in a hotel this afternoon." "Is she aware of this decision?" Ross asked. "She will be." Vincent's cold tone suggested his distaste for the woman who was supposed to be his bride. "And she'll probably ruin my evening." "Don't let her." Ross dismissed the topic, tired of hearing about the woman, and grateful she would be out of their lives soon. "Where's Butch?" "On his way to the airport," Vincent told him. "He's picking up a client." "Forgot," Ross murmured as he sat on the plush sofa near Vincent's desk. "So you're going to be a free man again, huh? That's exciting." "Don't get too excited yet. My mother is crafty, as we both know," Vincent said as he walked to his desk chair and sat down. "She's determined that I be king of the lion shifters, to take her place." "Why?" "She knows full well you don't want to be the king, that she should find someone else," Ross said. Even before Vincent became the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, he hadn't wanted to be king. To Vincent, the idea of a monarchy ruling over his or her people was outdated. In all honesty, his mother did not rule with impunity. She had as much power as the President of the United States. She had to answer to a council of her people as well. Vincent had often compared what his mother did to what he did. Running a corporation as the CEO and founder gave him a certain amount of power, but he had to answer to a board of directors. However, the business world was his forte. He fit in, knew the right decision every time, deciding whether this lion shifter or that one had the right to. He didn't even know what types of things lion shifters in the country complained about. Ross just knew that Vincent didn't know either, and really didn't care. Vincent rolled his eyes at Ross as he powered on his computer so he could get some work done today. "Do you remember my mother? Her way is the right way, always, no matter what anyone else wants. She's a tyrant, but only when it comes to you. Yes, her people use up all her patience." Vincent mimicked his mother's speech pattern, and Ross snorted out a laugh. Vincent also chuckled. "Damn, she'd kick my ass if she heard me right now." Ross laughed louder. "You're damn right she would. She's a feisty lion, that's for sure." Ross sat up and pointed at Vincent. "You know, if you want to get your mom off your back about getting married, you need to actually date. Someone you choose. My mother would never approve of someone I choose. She wants me to marry a lion shifter, and the ones I've met are too old, too young, or fucking crazy. Enter Gemma, Ross laughed. But what if you found a girl who could charm your mother? Certainly there is one out there. Vincent's eyes widened fractionally, igniting Ross's curiosity. Do I detect an interest in my idea? Vincent frowned at him. Actually, I met a woman in the elevator. Ross's eyebrows shot into his hairline. Are you serious? Yes, a human, Vincent replied. Ross waited for the punchline, hoping for a good laugh. But Vincent stared off into space as if lost in thought. You're kidding. A human? Your mother will flip. Probably, which adds to her appeal, Vincent told him, a sinister smile on his face. I like human women. They're so different, so much more interesting than lion shifters. I sure like them, Ross countered. He only dated human women, although he hadn't found one who could keep his interest for long. She's black as well. Black? Ross exclaimed. He sat back exasperated when Vincent nodded. You're trying to piss your mother off, am I right? Vincent shrugged. Maybe. There was something about her, though. Ross stared at his friend. He'd never heard him say anything like that about a woman, especially a human woman. Have you fallen in love at first sight? Vincent's head jerked around. Hell no, but I do want to meet her. I thought you met her in the elevator. I didn't get her name, Vincent growled. Okay, well, she must work here if she was in that elevator. We can track her down easily, Ross affirmed. She works for Bill Thompson. Even easier. My question for you is, once I have her name, what are you going to do? Vincent frowned, adding handsome creases to an already handsome face. He would age well. I don't know yet. He glanced at Ross. Find out what her name is and bring me her employee file, please. Sure thing, boss. Ross rose and left the office, frowning. Vincent knew he'd confused his friend. A woman had never captured his attention so completely that he hunted her. He didn't have to do that. Women found him. But something about her had captured him. And he had to know more about her. Back downstairs, Denai was breathless. Something about the man had been so arousing, almost banishing his rudeness from her memory. And that spark, where the hell did that come from? She wasn't used to reacting to a man so strongly without knowing him. In fact, as she walked back to her desk, she tried to remember a man who had affected her as much as Vincent Wallace and couldn't think of a single one. And she was no innocent flower. She'd had her share of lovers, both male and female. No one had aroused her so quickly and without working at it in her entire life. When she reached her desk, Lexi skipped over. Where have you been? Calvin said we could take an early lunch. You won't believe what happened, Denai gushed. Tell you now or while we're eating? While we're eating, of course. Today is our day to go out to lunch, Lexi reminded her. Denai grimaced. Hey, listen, I can't go out to lunch this week or at all until we get paid. Lexi pouted. But why? Denai smiled at her friend's puckered lips. Because I'm broke. Oh yeah, your cat, how is she? She's fine, thank you for asking. Denai deadpanned. Lexi put her hip on Denai's desk and grinned. I'll buy your lunch today. You can catch me next month. Oh, Lexi, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that, Denai said. That's silly. We're friends, and you'll buy my lunch next month. We can actually trade back and forth like that, Lexi pronounced. She bounced off the desk, grabbed Denai's hand, and said, Come on, I've been thinking about that deli on the corner all afternoon. Denai laughed. All right, we'll take turns. Yay! Lexi clapped her hands and hurried to her desk to get her purse. Let's go before Calvin changes his mind and decides he needs me to help him go to the bathroom, she hissed as they scampered to the elevator. Once they reached the deli and had settled down with their lemonades, Denai asked, Okay, are you ready for my morning excitement? Yes, what happened? You've been almost giddy since you came back, Lexi said. She watched Denai over the rim of her glass, her pretty eyes shining with merriment. Well, Mr. Thompson asked me to take a file to the CEO, a file he requested directly from our office, Denai began. She took a sip of her lemonade and grimaced a little at the tartness. I got to ride in the special elevator that's only for the supervisors. How'd you do that? Lexi gasped. Mr. Thompson gave me his key card, she squealed. And when it opened, there he stood. Who? The CEO, Vincent Wallace himself, she screeched quietly, excitement clear in her voice. Ladies, have you decided what you'd like to eat? The waiter interrupted abruptly. Both women glanced up at him, surprised. I'd like the Cobb salad with ranch dressing on the side, Denai said. The same but without tomatoes, Lexi told him. I'll have that right out, the waiter said, smiling without feeling at the two of them. After he'd walked away, Denai said, Well, he hates his job. Lexi waved her hand, banishing the waiter from the conversation. Forget him. What happened in the elevator? She looked up into the sky as if praying. Please tell me you made out with him. He fell in love with you, and today is your last day as a lowly secretary. There is nothing lowly about me, Danai told her, an eyebrow raised. They giggled and she continued, No kissing, though that man could make a girl's panties fall off without touching her, I'll tell you that. I've seen him. Lexi waved her hand in front of her face to cool herself off. I'd jump that man in a heartbeat, even if he were the poorest man on earth. He was kinda rude, though, Denai said. Gorgeous, but rude. He asked for my name, but the elevator door closed before I could tell him. Oh no, Lexi exclaimed. Yeah, Denai sighed. You know he's not going to look for me. We didn't have that much of a connection. Too bad, Lexi said, as if she'd lost a job. Maybe Mr. Thompson will ask you to take something else upstairs. One can only hope, Denai said with a dramatic sigh just as the waiter arrived with their food. Here's her file, Ross said an hour later. He handed a slim manila folder to his boss. Denai Marcellus. There's not much in there. She's worked in Mr. Thompson's office for the last 3 years, the whole time she's been employed with us. She hasn't been written up, she hasn't been promoted, though she has been given raises based on her excellent evaluations. So she's good at her job, Vincent mused. That doesn't surprise me. You spoke with her for less than 2 minutes and you think you know her? Ross asked before he could catch himself. Vincent smiled at him. Yes. Ross stared at him for a moment, then nodded his head. Well, okay. I'll be in my office if you need me. Thank you, Ross, Vincent said. His friend waved without a word and walked out. Vincent smiled. Of the 3 of best friends, he was the most stoic, always had been. Quieter and calmer, he was the voice of reason. But this woman, Denai, a lovely name, had stolen his reason with her soulful eyes and sweet face. He was drawn to her, despite his lack of knowledge. After reading her file, which Ross had perfectly summed up, he turned to his computer and began a search. She had profiles on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. He'd bet $1 million of his fortune she had a Snapchat too, but he had no idea how to find out. His company had a social media department who handled all of that, but he had access to all of them, luckily, because he did not have an account anywhere. Not his thing. Her latest tweet, he saw, was a comment on a television show he had never heard of. Scrolling back, he found tweets about animals and discovered she was an active volunteer for ASPCA. She followed her favorite actors, their real Twitter accounts as well as some of the fake ones meant to be humorous, but nothing political. She had live tweeted during the Sharknado extravaganza, her witty comments retweeted by others. She had a hell of a sense of humor online, and he hoped that translated into real life. Switching gears, he opened the Facebook account for his company, then searched her name. Feeling a little like a stalker, he hoped her profile wasn't set to private. Luckily, she followed the company so he could see everything. Her profile picture was a selfie she had taken at a beach somewhere. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and she wore oversized sunglasses to help ease the glare from the sun. He could only see her shoulders, but the straps of her bathing suit were a bright red, perfectly matched with her beautiful skin. He wanted to touch her skin, wondering if it was as soft as it looked. After closing her profile, he thought about the best approach. He picked up her file again and flipped through the few pages it held, contemplating. His secretary, Melinda, popped into his mind. She had mentioned recently, caustically, that she was nearing retirement age. He'd asked her if she'd been serious. "Of course I'm serious," she'd replied quickly. "I'll be 65 this summer." "Really?" he had asked, shock plain in his voice. "I had no idea. I thought you were closer to 50. "Good living, Mr. Wallace," she had replied with little emotion. "When do you think you'll leave me?" "I'll let you know when I decide," she'd told him, looking at him with an eyebrow raised. "Please feel free to start searching for my replacement. She will need to be trained." "Your will to do that?" "I will not leave you without a qualified, well-trained assistant, Mr. Wallace. That would be unprofessional," Melinda had explained. "I'll start looking soon then. You should know I'll miss you," Vincent had told her, watching for any emotional reaction. She had looked up at him, and a small smile crossed her face. "Of course you will. And I'll miss you. Sometimes." Vincent chuckled at the memory. She would never admit that she cared for him. And no matter who he hired, she would never be Melinda. But how fortuitous! Perhaps Danai Marcellus was about to get a promotion. He smiled to himself as he gathered his things to leave, happy to have solved 2 problems at once. He needed a new secretary, and he wanted to get to know Danai better. Perfect. He could hear Melinda tisking under her breath about how unprofessional his reason for choosing was, but he didn't care. Now to go home and solve another problem. When he climbed into his car, he settled back into the leather and enjoyed the ride home. He poured himself 2 fingers of scotch, hoping the fiery liquid would relax him enough to deal with the theatrics he was sure Gemma would subject him to. He let Danai's face play in his mind as the rumble of the car soothed him, nearly putting him to sleep. "We're home, sir," his driver murmured quietly so as not to jar him. Vincent smiled at him. "Thank you. Wish me luck in there." "Good luck. I'm sorry you're going to need it," he replied, smiling at his boss. Vincent sighed as he climbed out and walked up the front stairs of his home, dreading the fact that every step brought him closer to Gemma. He stepped inside, immediately removing his coat and leaving it laying across a chair. She wasn't downstairs, so he trudged up to the room he shared with her without seeing any of the servants. "Gemma?" he called when he reached the bedroom. "Over here, love," he heard her coo. He turned his head and gasped. Gemma was laid out in the bed, nude, posing as if for one of her forgotten photo shoots. The smile she wore was also straight from a photo shoot. It did not reach her eyes. Her legs, long, shapely, and tanned, were spread just enough to tease him with the pink of her pussy. Her breasts, perky and small, glittered with some spray she'd used to add to her appeal. Champagne flutes sat on the bedside table, and a bucket filled with ice held the chilled bottle. Frowning, Vincent walked into the room and stood in front of her, his mind debating the best course of action. "What is this?" he asked, not bothering to hide the distaste at her vulgar display. "I want to apologize for our wicked fight this morning. It was my fault, and I'm sorry," she purred, raising her voice to sound innocent and sweet. "I thought I'd make it up to you tonight. Care to join me?" "Not particularly," Vincent replied coldly. "Rip off the Band-Aid," he told himself. "I have a different idea for our evening." Gemma had raised an eyebrow at his tone, and her eyes flashed with anger. However, his idea intrigued her, and she replaced the smile on her face. "What's your idea, handsome?" "You are going to pack your things and move to the Grenada Hotel downtown." She jerked as if he'd slapped her. "You're kicking me out?" she murmured, retaining her innocent facade even though her eyes showed her fury clearly. "Over one fight. Gemma, we've had many more than one fight. This was the final fight. I don't want to marry you, and you only want to marry me because I'm rich and because I'll be king. Neither of those reasons are good enough for me," Vincent told her, hoping his reasoning, his reasonable tone, would reach through the psychosis to the normal woman he knew hid in that brain somewhere. "I do not want to marry you because you're rich or because you'll be king," she screeched, dashing his hopes. "I love you. You do not," he accused. You love my money." She glared at him momentarily, and he could see the wheels turning in her head. She was trying to figure out how to handle this. Vincent frowned. He saw it in her eyes when her decision was made. She crawled out of bed and walked seductively towards him, her eyes filled with pretend lust. "Vincent, please don't do this. I do love you. I'm just spoiled, you know that." She purred again. She reached for him, to rub her hands up and down his chest, but he stopped her by grasping her wrists. "Why are you trying so hard to get me to fuck you?" he asked, suspicious of her motives. "You want to get pregnant, don't you? Trap me in this marriage so even my mother would be on your side." "How dare you!" she shrieked, all her composure gone once the accusation was made. "Come on, Gemma. Be honest. Someone told you I'd reserved that room, am I right?" She only glared at him, but the hint of guilt was there. "You knew I was coming home to kick you out and you decided to seduce me." "You bastard!" She screamed the obscenity, the high pitch hurting his ears. "I loved you. I wanted to make you happy, and you treat me like a whore." "You're delusional, Gemma. The only person who treats you like a whore is you." Vincent turned his back on her, intending to walk out. "I'll send up a couple of servants to help you pack your things." "You will not throw me out like the trash, Vincent," she yelled, lobbing one of the champagne flutes at him. It exploded over his back, showering him with the sweet, sticky liquid, though none of the glass cut him. He turned back to her and pointed. "Gemma, I will have you forcibly removed from this house if you continue this behavior. Pack your shit and get the fuck out of my house. You don't live here anymore." "You can use that damn hotel room yourself, Vincent," she growled. "I'm not leaving until your mother tells me the engagement is over. You don't run this show, your mother does." She turned away from him, sauntering back to the bed. "Enjoy your stay at the Grenada." She flounced onto the bed, her perfect breasts bouncing slightly. The smile on her face made Vincent see red. He wanted to kill her. He reined in his fury, using every ounce of self-control not to shift and attack. Rather than kill her, he would humiliate her. He lifted his phone out of his pocket and dialed. "Hey, Vincent, what's happening?" Butch answered, his voice jovial. With a calm professionalism, Vincent said, "Hello, Butch. I'll be needing your assistance at the house. You may want to bring an extra man or two. Gemma needs to be escorted out." Gemma gasped. "On my way, boss," Butch replied, his demeanor changing immediately to all business. "Thank you," he answered and hung up. His eyes had remained on Gemma. "Now, Gemma, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Butch can escort you or he can force you. Either way, you'll be leaving this house tonight." Gemma only stared at him. Her body quaked with fury and she seemed unable to speak. Vincent recognized the signs. She was preparing to shift. If she shifted, she would attack. And though he was male and bigger, a pissed-off lioness could pack one hell of a punch. Add crazy to the mix and he could be in serious trouble. "Gemma, shifting will not solve this problem." He said it in an offhand manner as if he didn't care. "You motherfucker!" she roared, a battle cry. She leapt from the bed and had shifted to lioness before she touched him. Vincent reacted by sidestepping her leap, and she crashed into the wall. Spinning, she renewed her attack. Vincent had used the moment to shift, and now the pair circled each other. "Magnificent and powerful," Vincent growled deep in his throat at her, a warning. His male lion was a full hand taller, was longer and wider. His powerful claws would slice her to bits. He had training, she had only insanity and anger. She leapt again, unexpectedly. He really had thought she was just doing this for show. Her claws grazed his chest, and 3 perfect scratches appeared, bleeding as if he'd been stabbed. He roared and flung himself on her, pinning her writhing lion body to the floor. He could not shift to speak to her, reason with her. She'd kill him. But he refused to let her hurt him again. He held her, spitting, clawing, snapping her jaws at him, until Butch rushed into the room, followed by 2 men. "Gemma!" Butch yelled to get her attention. She ignored him at first, fighting with all her lion strength. "Gemma, if I shift, I'll hurt you. Are we clear? I do not have the restraint Vincent has. Gemma stilled, and her eyes cut from Vincent to Butch. Vincent, get off her. Vincent released her, stepped back, and shifted into human form, the scratches on his chest oozing blood. Gemma immediately shifted and hurried to Butch, pressing her naked body against him. Oh my God, Butch, thank God you're here. He attacked me. Butch shrugged her off. You're playing the wrong card with me, Gemma. You aren't going to do anything, she shrilled. The man shifted and attacked me. I was protecting myself. Gemma, get some clothes on and leave now. I'll have your things sent to you. I don't want you in my home a moment longer, Vincent said, breathing hard from pain, anger, and exertion. Gemma looked from Vincent to Butch and back. I'll leave, you son of a bitch, but this isn't over. I'm going to make your life a living hell. You have been for a year. There's not much worse you can do, unless I have to continue living with you. Vincent replied as he dabbed at the cuts with a piece of his destroyed shirt, which had exploded off his body with the rest of his clothes when he'd shifted. Fuck you! You have no idea what I'm capable of, Gemma swore as she shoved some pants and a t-shirt over her naked form. She turned and walked out of the room. Butch raised an eyebrow at him. Need me to call somebody to look at that? No, just get her the hell out of here and make sure she stays at that hotel, Vincent grumbled. Will do, boss. Butch turned and walked out. Vincent heard him speaking to Gemma, although his words were lost. Gemma's, however, were clear when she told him to fuck off, get his hands off her, etc. Vincent shook his head, vowing to let his mother have it when he spoke to her again. He shifted into his lion form once again so that his body could heal itself. Bitch is stronger than I thought, he mused good-naturedly. He would think twice about another scuffle with Gemma.
Chapter 4. The elevator doors opened, and Denai looked into the sexy brown eyes of Vincent again. She stepped inside without the hesitation, smiling at him. The file she held fell to the floor as she put her hands on his chest. No words were necessary.
Oh no. This adult scene has been taken out and is exclusively available for Romancely Audio Velvet members. Check the description below to sign up. The love scene reference is Her Lion Shifter's Arranged Marriage. Chapter 4, Love Scene 1.
In the subway on the way to work, the creep who had tried to assault her did not ride in the same car as she did. She watched as he climbed onto a different car, smirking. Men like him needed to be put in their place. As she rode, the dream played again in her head, and she had to squeeze her ample thighs together to calm her aching need. Stop picturing it, she yelled in her head. She reminded herself it wouldn't happen, never in a million years. But her mind didn't listen. His golden eyes remained in her head, causing a small smile to remain on her face the entire subway ride to the office. When she reached the 5th floor, she walked immediately to the break room to make coffee. She was saving what she had at home for the weekend when she didn't get the free coffee at work. Frowning at the reminder of her finances, thoughts of her handsome, rude boss left her mind. All her bills were paid, thank the gods, but little extras would be scarce this month. She could live without. She had considered calling her dad to ask for money, but she just couldn't do it. He would gladly give it to her. He had plenty, after all. He owned a plumbing service with 4 employees, and they never lacked business. But she couldn't ask him. Her pride wouldn't let her. She sipped her coffee as she walked back to her desk. Neither Mr. Thompson nor Lexi were at work yet. She kicked back in her chair and enjoyed a few minutes of silence with her coffee. Taking the earlier train, at 8 rather than 8:30, gave her about 20 minutes alone in the office each morning. Sometimes she flipped through Facebook, sometimes she caught up on her Twitter feed, and other times, she simply let her mind play. As she pulled up her phone to check out Facebook, her computer pinged, announcing the arrival of an internal email. She glanced over and saw the email was from Ross Edgars, Vincent Wallace's personal assistant. Frowning, she placed her phone on her desk and opened her work email. Miss Marcellus, Vincent Wallace, CEO of Wallace Industries, requests your presence in his office today at 9:15 a.m. Please ask your superior, Bill Thompson, for his key card for access to the private elevator you used yesterday. Be assured this is in no way a reprimand. Enjoy your morning. Ross Edgars. Shocked, Danai didn't hear Lexi walk up behind her. She jerked and yelped when Lexi laid her hand on her shoulder. Whoa, friend. Are you okay? You scared the hell out of me, Danai cried, her hand on her chest. I'm already about to have a heart attack. Why? Read this email. Danai pushed her chair back so Lexi could move closer. Her leg bounced uncontrollably out of nervousness, so she sat her coffee down on the desk before she spilled it. Lexi leaned closer to the screen, her eyes moving quickly over the words. As she read, her eyes got bigger and bigger, and her mouth dropped open. She looked around at Danai. What the hell? I don't know, Danai nearly screeched. She lowered her voice and looked around. Do you think I'm in trouble? Well, it says this isn't a reprimand, Lexi mumbled, rereading the email. Yeah, but the CEO wants to see me. What the hell for? Danai jumped up and began pacing. Maybe I took him the wrong file. Maybe he just needs the correct one. She spun around. But that's stupid. If I took him the wrong file, he'd let Mr. Thompson know and I'd take the correct one up. Calling me up there without a reason is crazy. What if I'm in trouble? Why does he want to see just me? Lexi watched her as she panicked over the summons. She let her pace back and forth twice more, then grabbed her shoulders and shook her just a little. Okay, you have to calm down. Take 2 deep breaths. Danai did as she was told and felt calmer instantly. Okay, I'm calmer. To make sure, she took 2 more breaths. Lexi released her. Okay, now, you've been called to the boss's office. It's really no different than being called to the principal's office. There's a big difference. Get suspended, get fired. Danai held up both hands, palms up, to emphasize her point. Guess that's true, Lexi mused. You are not helping me, Danai hissed. Do I take anything up there? Like what? You have no idea what he wants, Lexi reasoned. Mr. Thompson walked in at that moment. He looked at Danai's panicked face and stopped. Danai, are you all right? I got an email from Ross Edgar saying Mr. Wallace wants to see me in his office at 9:15. Mr. Thompson frowned. Wonder what that's about. He shrugged as if it wasn't a big deal at all and pulled out his key card. Here, you'll need this. Do you think I'm in trouble? Danai asked him as she took it from him. No, of course not, dear, he assured her with a pat on the shoulder. Mr. Wallace doesn't handle things like that. He'd leave it to me. You don't know what he wants with me? I've no idea, but I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. He turned and walked into his office, whistling as if the world couldn't get better. Danai and Lexi exchanged looks, and Danai rolled her eyes. I guess I shouldn't worry then, Lexi giggled. I guess not. She glanced at her watch. It's 9:05. You better head up there. I may be sick, Danai mumbled as she turned away, her hand pressed to her coffee-filled stomach. Good luck, Lexi called, and Danai detected just the hint of sarcasm combined with a giggle. Bitch, she thought, though she didn't mean it. After swiping the keycard, she stepped into the elevator. The doors closed as she turned to face them, but she didn't push the button to take her to the top floor. She just stood there, her mind whirling with every possible reason the man might want to see her. Not one of them was good. Taking Lexi's advice, she took a deep breath and refocused her energy. After 2 more, her mind was calm again, her thoughts moving at a normal pace. She pushed the button and began the ascent to the CEO's office, her stomach a nervous wreck. He can't see you like this. Nerves clear in your eyes and movements, she scolded herself. As the elevator moved up, she let her mind drift to her dream. Only fragments remained in her memory, brief flashes of naked skin, pleasure, and thrusting. She could feel her body becoming aroused, a different kind of tension. This isn't good either, she reprimanded. She couldn't face him with that dream foremost in her mind. Toe hair, Boob sweat, creeper guy, lava, football. She continued repeating random, off-the-wall things she didn't like or that disgusted her, and her body's serenity returned. Why does this man have so much power over my emotions and thoughts after one damn minute in an elevator together? She whispered to herself, shaking her head. The elevator dinged and the doors opened. Mustering every bit of courage she'd ever had in her life, she stepped out of the elevator and looked in both directions. To her right was a dead end, a hallway that led to a window she bet had a spectacular view. To her left was a man who appeared to be waiting for her. His hair was black, his skin dark, and his smile bright and white. He stepped forward, extending his hand to her. "Ms. Marcellus?" he asked, his voice as smooth as expensive whiskey. "Yes." She extended her hand and took his, a small smile on her face. She hoped he couldn't tell her hand was shaking. "Are you all right, Ms. Marcellus? You seem nervous." "I'm fine, thank you," she replied quietly. "I'm Ross Edgars, Mr. Wallace's assistant. As I told you in the email, you have nothing to worry about. You aren't in trouble," he told her, his smile reassuring, his voice comforting and deep like her father's. A breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding escaped in a huff, accompanied by a little laugh. "Your email scared the wits out of me, Mr. Edgars," he chuckled, a deep baritone. "I apologize. When Vincent wants to meet with someone, my job is to make it happen. Please, follow me." As she fell into step beside him, hurrying a little to match the steps of his 6-foot frame, she noted his use of Mr. Wallace's first name casually. "More than an assistant," she mused. After passing an empty desk, Ross said, "Here we are." He opened a door that led into what was supposed to be an office but looked like a small apartment to Deny. In fact, she'd bet it was a little bit bigger. "Wow," she breathed. Ross looked around, smiling. "His office is impressive." He looked back down at her. "He had to run down the hall for a moment and will be right back. Please have a seat on the couch. Is there anything I can get you? Coffee?" "Thank you, no, I just finished a cup," Deny responded. "I knew you were a coffee drinker." He laughed, further easing her tension. "He'll be back in a few." He turned and shut the door, leaving her in the magnificent office alone. Deny listened for footsteps, hoping she had a moment to look around. The carpet she walked on disguised her own footsteps as she moved closer to the wall that was made of glass. She wanted to step behind his desk, but she didn't want to be caught somewhere she wasn't supposed to be. The view, even from 10 feet away, was spectacular. She longed to put her head against the window and peer at the beautiful city that lay so many hundreds of feet beneath. Rather than give in to her desire, she looked around the room, taking in the expensive decor, the crystal decanter filled with an amber liquid she bet cost more than her paycheck. His desk was black, with a black glass top that was glimmeringly clean. How do he not leave fingerprints and smudges all over it? She wondered. His chair was large, leather and overstuffed, and looked more comfortable than the recliner in her living room. Across from his desk was a large sofa and a table with 2 chairs on the other side. He didn't conduct business while sitting at his desk, but rather in the comfort of the sofa and soft leather chairs. Donna liked the idea, the casualness it inspired, but that didn't mean she wanted to be sitting across from him. Her anxiety returned, and when she heard the door open, her stomach clenched. She turned and watched as Vincent Wallace walked in the door. His eyes met hers instantly, and he stopped moving and just watched her. Deny felt like prey, an elk in the presence of a grizzly. She couldn't break the eye contact, even though a shiver shot down her spine. As if he sensed her uneasiness, he moved slowly toward her, his eyes never leaving hers, a predator approaching his prey with measured steps. When he was merely 2 feet away, close enough to touch, he spoke. "Good morning, Ms. Marcellus. Thank you for being prompt." His breath traveled over her face, and rather than being disgusted by it, she felt aroused. Time to break the eye contact, she told herself. She smiled and looked down, hoping he didn't sense her arousal. "Good morning, Mr. Wallace. What can I do for you this morning? Vincent lifted an eyebrow and thought, what can't you do for me? However, he chose a more diplomatic approach. Please, have a seat. There's something I'd like to discuss with you. He moved to his desk and lifted a file off it. He pressed an intercom button. Melinda, would you please send in some coffee? Of course, Mr. Wallace. A voice spoke through the intercom, clear as if she were in the room. Denai had sat on the very edge of the sofa, her nerves too high-strung to relax on the plush sofa. Before she could stop herself, she blurted, Am I in trouble, sir? Her cheeks were on fire, but she didn't break eye contact with him as he chuckled and sat in one of the chairs across the table. What gave you that impression? In her mind, she growled. He'd answered her question with a question, a tactic she hated. I've never met you before yesterday when I gave you that file. And the next day, your assistant emails me to be in your office by 9:15. Vincent nodded, enjoying her reasoning, false though it was. That does make sense, but it's not accurate. You are not in trouble. Far from it, in fact. Denai tilted her head to the side, frowning. Vincent watched as the questions flew through her mind, her eyes clearly displaying for him her confusion and her fear. Finally, she nodded. Okay, so I'm not in trouble. Please excuse my manners, but why am I here, sir? Vincent smiled beautifully at her. I would like to offer you a job. I have a job with your company, she replied quickly, eliciting a chuckle from him. You do? I would like to offer you a job in this office, he said, gesturing around him. Denai's eyes widened. You mean a promotion? Of sorts. A knock sounded on the door, which opened without a response from him. He rose and spoke to the woman who carried a tray with a carafe and 2 cups on it. Thank you, Melinda. Of course. Anything else? Melinda asked him, though her eyes were on Danai as she spoke. No, thank you, he answered. She nodded without taking her eyes off Danai, then turned abruptly and walked out, closing the door with an unnecessary sharpness. Danai wondered why the woman had stared at her, frowning, though she chose not to ask. Vincent poured coffee for both of them, smiling at her as he set cream and sugar on the table between them before he handed her the cup. She looked down at it. She didn't really want it, but the smell was glorious. She blew into it to cool it, then sipped and sighed with pure pleasure. Vincent had watched her purse her lips, and he hardened slightly in his pants. Stunned by the arousal such a simple gesture had caused in him, he cleared his throat and shifted in his seat. The sigh that had escaped her lips after sipping, that was one he wanted to cause in a much different way. Wow, this coffee is delicious. Requires nothing, she smiled. She sipped again, her nervousness gone. She placed her cup on the table and looked at him, waiting for him to continue their conversation. My secretary Melinda is retiring soon. I need a qualified replacement. She brought in coffee to make sure you met with her approval. Denai stared at him. You want me to take her place? Yes. He said this so simply she felt like she was missing something. Melinda will train you in the next few weeks so that you'll be completely prepared to take over for her when she leaves. But why me? He waved the manila folder at her. This is your employee file. Nothing but glowing reports from Mr. Thompson. He'll be sad to see you go, should you choose to take the job.
Chapter 5. Vincent's answer was too simple for Danai. There had to be more to this. Yes, she was an excellent employee and worked very hard to be good at her job. She didn't like the idea of deserting Mr. Thompson or not seeing Lexi on a daily basis. However, missing people was not a good reason to turn down a job. She had a few questions to ask before she made any decision. So, Mr. Wallace, what exactly would this job entail? Danai asked, her voice clear and strong. Vincent's respect for her doubled. She didn't just accept something that would obviously be better. She wanted details first. Smart. As my personal assistant, you would be in charge of my schedule, business and personal. While officially you would work 9 to 5, I would sometimes require later hours, depending. Depending on what? She asked, an eyebrow raised. The man was not forthcoming with any information. She would have to drag every piece of information out of him. How frustrating. Vincent smiled at her expression. Damn, she was beautiful. What we're working on, if I need someone to accompany me to a meeting, occasionally I'll ask you to travel with me on business trips. Business trips? Danai asked. She wasn't sure she liked the idea of traveling with him. Too much closeness, too many possibilities. Pardon my rudeness, but don't you have a fiancé who would travel with you? Reading the gossip sites, he asked, his tone cooler. Danai shifted in her seat, uncomfortable with the shift in his tone. Who doesn't? You're the famous billionaire, and I work for you. Even if I didn't read it, which I do, my friends would tell me all about this or that because you are my boss. Vincent frowned, his thoughts moving. She sounded so logical, which he needed in his life. A woman who used logic rather than emotion to make her decisions. She was as different from Gemma as night from day. Point well made, Miss Marcellus. I did have a fiancé, but she and I have parted ways. Last night, in fact. I'm sorry to hear that, Mr. Wallace, she told him sincerely, ashamed she had brought it up. Back to the job. Why exactly would I have to travel? I assure you, if I take the job, I can make all the arrangements from here. I'm sure you could, which is why I want you as my personal assistant. However, he answered, gesturing with his hand in a circular motion, things come up. Things I pay someone else very handsomely to take care of. I would like that someone to be you. What kinds of things? She had skirted the topic of money, which intrigued Vincent. He shrugged in answer. Who knows? Melinda has always handled them, so I didn't have to. So she traveled with you? Yes. Vincent cringed just a little internally. Melinda had traveled with him. Twice. The whole time she'd worked for him. But Danai didn't need specifics. Is traveling with me a problem, Ms. Marcellus? Is there a boyfriend who might get jealous? Danai chuckled. No boyfriend. A girlfriend, then? No. Danai watched his face. He didn't mean it rudely, he was just clarifying. For a brief moment, she thought she saw interest in his eyes. Sexual interest. She chided herself for dreaming, which reminded her of her dream. Briefly, she looked away from him to collect herself. What about your family? Will this be a problem for them? He asked. No. She cleared her throat and returned her eyes to his, completely in control of her thoughts again. Your questions are a little personal for a job interview, don't you think? Vincent's eyes widened. Then he laughed loudly. You're probably right. But I've always lacked manners. My assistant handles that area of my life. You mean I have to remind you of your manners, or I have to do the polite conversing in your stead? Again he chuckled and wagged a finger in her direction. Quick as a whip. I'm making the right choice, if you're interested in the job. He sipped his cooling coffee, noticing hers sat completely untouched. And you have to do both, actually. Danai's thoughts whirled in her head as she contemplated what this job could mean. Better salary, she was sure of it, though she hadn't asked. The opportunity to travel for free. She knew where Vincent's business trips often took him. His trips were covered by all the gossip sites. Paris, Milan, Tokyo, London, even St. Petersburg, all the major cities in the world. Cities she'd never be able to afford to go to on her own. That alone made her want to take the job. Vincent watched her as her thoughts flitted through her mind, clear on her face and in her eyes. She did not hide her feelings or thoughts well. He'd have to teach her how to maintain a poker face while in meetings. He cleared his throat. I'm glad you're thinking about this, but you've been quiet for 2 minutes. While you've been thinking, I pulled this information for you. Your salary and stipends are on this piece of paper, as well as the other amenities you'll receive as my personal assistant. He handed her a clean, white piece of paper with several sentences typed on it. Danai glanced at it and gasped as her eyes widened. Along with an exorbitant salary, She would be given a wardrobe allowance, a travel allowance that included a car stipend. Her phone would be paid for, as well as her medical insurance and life insurance should she wish to have any. Lastly, she would be given stock options with the company, which she knew would make her retirement more than comfortable. She looked at him and held the paper up. "Are you serious?" Vincent chortled, an almost snuffling sound that sounded like an animal to Danai. Rather than turned off by it, she found the noise endearing. "I am very serious. I treat my employees well, especially those who work close with me." Danai glanced at the list again, rereading it as she contemplated his words. He spoke truthfully. His company took very good care of its employees. As the assistant to Mr. Thompson, she brought home a good salary. It was her own fault she couldn't make a savings. Her medical insurance was paid for, but the other amenities were only for the higher-level employees, apparently. With this raise, she would never have to worry about money again. "I don't have a car," she murmured. "You'll need one if you take this job," Vincent told her. "The car allowance should cover a payment as well as for parking." "My apartment building doesn't have parking," she said. Vincent arched an eyebrow. "Perhaps you could move with the new salary, somewhere safer." "Do you know where I live?" she asked suspiciously. "Your address is in your file. I am familiar with the area." He leaned forward, putting his elbows on his knees and looking at her. "It's not the most dangerous, but it's by far not the safest. And taking the train from that area is definitely not in the best interest of a beautiful woman alone, especially at night. You'll be working late hours if you take this job. I'd prefer you had a car." "I'm not even sure I want to take this job, Mr. Wallace." Danai was uncomfortable with his knowledge of her life. More than just noting the address on her file, he seemed familiar with the surrounding areas as well. "I understand your hesitancy. You're looking for all the angles, as you should," Vincent responded, sitting back again. She hadn't batted an eye when he'd called her beautiful. She intrigued him more and more the longer they talked. "If you take this job, I'll have Melinda outline everything for you. You'll have no questions as to your responsibilities." "That sounds good," Danai told him, a smile on her face. She wagged the paper at him again. "This is a very generous, Mr. Wallace. I would like the night to think about it, if you don't mind." "I wouldn't expect anything less, Ms. Marcellus," Vincent told her. He crossed one leg over the other, putting his ankle on his knee in a more relaxed pose. "Take the rest of the day off if you'd like to think about it." "That would be nice," Danai said. "May I speak with Mr. Thompson about this?" "Of course. Ask his opinion, but don't let him guilt you into staying," he chuckled. Again she smiled, and his heart thudded unexpectedly. He rose as she did. "Thank you for your time." "Thank you for this amazing offer," Danai replied, allowing him to lead her to the door, his hand at the small of her back, a whisper from touching her. "I'll be back here at the same time tomorrow morning, if that works for you." "Perfect," he murmured, standing close to her. "I look forward to seeing you again. Please plan on having brunch with me tomorrow, whether you take the job or not. You're an interesting person, and I'd like to know you better." Danai watched his eyes as he spoke, the obvious attraction between them clear in his voice and expression. She felt it too, but it couldn't cloud her decision. After a longer than polite staring contest with the man who might be her direct boss soon, Danai moved to the door. "Of course. Thank you." She left before he could speak again, hurrying to the elevator. Danny moved slowly through the waiting room, hoping Melinda would be at her desk. The woman, though, was missing, so Danai could not ask her any questions. So many spilled through her mind like a waterfall just released from the dam. What in the world would she be doing for him that he would pay her so much? She wondered briefly if he dabbled in illegal activities, but dismissed the idea quickly. How often would she have to travel? Who in the hell gave his secretary enough of a stipend to pay for a car? She had as many pros as cons when thinking about the possibility of taking the job. And the man was so hot. As she stepped into the elevator, she realized her panties were wet and not from sweat. She was aroused. They had been sitting across from each other, speaking about a life-changing career opportunity, and she wanted to go back and rip his clothes off just so she could see him naked. Of course, she thought with a smirk. If he were naked, she'd do every naughty thing she could think of. Bet she'd definitely get the job then. She snorted at her own thoughts, but that was just another con. If she took the job, she would be in close contact with the man at least 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. More if they traveled. And she was sure the attraction she felt for Vincent was reciprocated, which only added to anxiety of making this decision. She needed help. Lexi, Mr. Thompson, her dad. She would need advice from all three. Determined, when the elevator opened, Danai marched straight to Mr. Thompson's office. Vincent had watched Danai rush out too quickly for him to follow, for him to even open the door for her. He chuckled as he plopped back down on the couch and reached for his coffee, which was now cold. Hers remained untouched across from him. "Goddamn, that woman is gorgeous," he mused as he put his coffee back down and rose to walk to his desk. Was this the best idea? Give her a job? He reconsidered his plan, which he admitted had been a little hasty, if not actually reckless. If she took the job, he'd be able to charm her, but he wouldn't be able to fuck her. Or could he? Lots of CEOs slept with their secretaries. The difference here, though, was that if he had the chance to sleep with her, he was afraid he'd want to get closer. He swiveled around in his chair and stared out the window, frowning at the idea. He hadn't wanted to be close to any woman in his life. Danai had walked into his life just yesterday, and he was worried about emotionally connecting with her. His palm smacked his forehead, and he hoped some sense was knocked loose. He chided himself for sounding like a romantic comedy as he glanced through the window.
Oh no. This adult scene has been taken out and is exclusively available for Romancely Audio Velvet members. Check the description below to sign up. The love scene reference is Her Lion Shifter's Arranged Marriage, Chapter 5, Love Scene 2.
20 minutes later, Danai was grabbing Lexi's hand and pulling her to the ladies' room. Mr. Thompson had encouraged her to take the position, though as Vincent had told her, the first thing he'd told her was how much he'd miss her should she choose to take the position. He'd asked when she would start, and she realized she didn't know the answer. She had forgot to ask that question. "I assume soon?" He said Melinda, his current assistant, wanted to retire and would take a few weeks to train me before she left. Danai shrugged. "So I guess whenever she's ready to train me." Mr. Thompson laughed. "That Melinda. You'll have a heck of a time with her, Danai. She seems hard as diamonds, but she loves Mr. Wallace, and she'll expect perfection from you because she's so perfect. And that's my opinion, not hers." "You're scaring me off, Mr. Thompson," Danai teased. "Are you doing that on purpose?" No. Mr. Thompson laughed again, shaking his head. "This is an opportunity you won't be given again, young lady. Take it. Grab it with both hands and live the life a girl like you deserves." Danai had left the office in tears, as if she'd taken the job already, and had said goodbye to the man she loved working for. Lexi struggled to keep up with her as she dragged her to the bathroom. As soon as the door was closed behind them, Danai clicked the lock so no one would interrupt them. Lexi gasped when Danai faced her, and she saw the tears in her eyes and the fear on her face. "Oh my God, you got fired, didn't you?" Lexi blurted as she grabbed some tissues and handed them to Danai. "I'll kill him in my dreams tonight." Danai let out a watery laugh, shaking her head as she wiped her cheeks. No, nothing like that. Keep your dream daggers for real assholes." "So what happened then? Why are you crying?" "He offered me a job," Danai murmured. She pulled the paper she'd folded and put in her pocket out and handed it to Lexi. While she read, Danai moved to the mirror and cleaned her face, and waited for the explosion. "Holy shit!" Lexi yelled as she finished. Her eyes were huge. "Well, you have to say yes." Danai laughed and threw her arms around her friend. "I was so hoping you'd say that. This is probably the most important decision I've ever made." "Not if you read this piece of paper, Danai," Lexi said, waving it under her nose with a grin the size of New York on her face. Why would you even have a question in your mind? Because I don't have a clue why he chose me, Danae nearly yelled, but she was lying. She had an inkling why Vincent Wallace would choose her. The attraction. She turned back to the mirror while she contemplated telling Lexi about it. He chose you because you're an amazing employee. Mr. Thompson brags about you all the time. After taking him that file yesterday, he must have looked at your file, Lexi reasoned. Yes, he had my file when I went up there this morning, Danae quietly murmured. She kept the other to herself. No need to cloud the issue. Her friend thought she should take the job, and she was right. I'll have to travel with him. Lexi's eyes widened even more. She looked like a pug, eliciting a small giggle from Danae. Travel with him? That god we call a boss? Damn, you are the luckiest woman in the world. The giggle grew into a guffaw. He would be my boss. I'd have to control my lust all the time. Not possible, my slutty friend. I am not a slut, Danae returned. And she wasn't. She'd slept with 3 men throughout her life, all in exclusive relationships. After their fit of giggles settled, she told Lexi, he gave me the rest of the day off so I could think about the job. Is Mr. Thompson okay with that? Danae shrugged. He said he was. He encouraged me to take the job as well. You should, Danae, Lexi said, smiling as she put her hand on her friend's shoulder. It really is the opportunity of a lifetime. Danae nodded. You're right. She straightened her shoulders and nodded again. I'm going home to think about what this would mean. It would mean goodbye, debt, hello, riches. Lexi laughed as she snapped her fingers. Greedy little bitch. Danae winked. She pulled the door open. Come on. I'm going to go home and clear my head in a lukewarm bath in my pitiful little apartment. If that doesn't convince me to take this job, nothing will. At home, Danae ran her hot bath in the tiny bathtub she hated. She could barely soak properly in it, but she did enjoy trying. After adding bath salts and grabbing the novel she'd just started, she walked back into the bathroom. The water, which had been running hot, was freezing, and no amount of tinkering could change the temperature. Frowning, she walked back to the living room to grab her phone so she could call the manager. Mrs. Bentley, the hot water heater must be on the fritz again, Danae griped, though in as polite a voice as she could muster. This is the 3rd time this month. The thing needs to be replaced. Replaced? Honey, you're crazy. It just needs some tender love and care, the old woman told her, her voice rusty from use and smoke abuse. I'll send old Fred up there this afternoon to look at it. Have it working good as new by tonight. Danae sighed loudly. Mrs. Bentley, the tender love and care you've given it for the last year hasn't seemed to help. Oh, honey, the woman scoffed, and Danae could picture her waving her wrinkled hand dismissively. Don't you worry, you'll have your hot water. The woman hung up before Danae could argue. Squeezing the phone tightly in her fist, she ground her teeth and let out her frustration in a yell. The damn water heater was older than she was. As she fumed, standing naked in what passed for a living room, she spied the paper Mr. Wallace had given her. If she took the job, she'd be able to move to an apartment with decent appliances and a water heater that worked. She'd nearly burned the building down the first time she'd turned on the stove. Mrs. Bentley had sent old Fred up to handle it, and it had worked since, but Danae was afraid to walk away if a burner was on. That's it. I'm taking the job, she told herself as she heard a siren pass under her window. A regular occurrence, even at 4 a.m. The decision made, she called for her sweet cat, curled up on her couch, and read her novel with a glass of wine by her side.
Chapter 6. Danae carefully chose her outfit for the day. A black pencil skirt paired with a red button-up blouse and red heels. In the full-length mirror, Danae admired her curves. She had always been proud of her ample figure, and the outfit perfectly displayed it. Vincent won't know what hit him, she thought, then immediately admonished herself. You are not going on a date. The man is going to be your boss. She shrugged. Never hurts to look good. And she felt confident and comfortable in her body. Her goal was to look like a serious businesswoman, and she had succeeded. She grabbed her bag and keys and headed out the door, wishing for the millionth time she had a car, then smiling brightly as she stepped out the front door of the building. She'd be able to get a car in just a few weeks, and this walk to the subway would be over. "Oh, that's bad," she thought as she walked briskly in the morning air. Walking to the subway was good exercise she'd have to make up doing something else. She could park in a garage a few blocks away, or she could join a gym. She chuckled. She'd never go to a gym. In her usual subway car, she smiled at the stripper sitting across from her, though the woman was lost in her own thoughts, or possibly asleep with her eyes open. The wig she wore today was bleached blonde and reminiscent of Marilyn Monroe. None of the other usuals were around today, and Danae felt a pang of sadness. She would miss making up stories about these people. As she pondered the changes about to happen in her life, she heard a man clear his throat close behind her. She turned her head and made eye contact with Creeper Dude, the man whose ass she'd kicked a few days ago. He glared at her, a menacing look on his face. Danae forced her face to remain blank, though a thrill of fear shot through her. The man was standing a respectable distance from her, but his icy stare remained fixed on her face. For the next 5 minutes, Danae had to physically force her eyes to stare at anything but the man. She could feel him watching her, so she acted as normally as possible until her stop arrived. As she crossed to the exit, his eyes followed her, sick of his disrespectful stare, and despite her better judgment, Danae turned. "What the hell are you looking at?" The man's face unfroze, and a sickening smile spread over his face. He still didn't speak, so Danae was forced to step off the train with only that smile as a response. She walked briskly out of the train, then turned to make sure the man wasn't following her. A sigh of relief slipped through her lips as the train continued down the tracks with the man on board. Just to be sure, she looked both directions in case he'd hurried to one of the other cars and climbed off. But she didn't see him. Her nerves frayed after the obviously threatening looks from the man. Danae walked out of the subway station at a slow pace, hoping to calm herself before she reached the office. As she walked up to the door of the building, deep breathing, a limo pulled up next to the curb at the front door. Vincent stepped out of the car and saw her instantly. He hurried to her after thanking his driver. "Danae, is something wrong?" His gentle hand on her arm and the use of her first name flustered her even more. "Oh, just a bad experience in the subway this morning." "What kind of bad experience?" he asked, a protective look crossing his face. She waved her hand dismissively at his concern. "It's nothing, really." Vincent stopped her just inside the door, moving close to her. "Tell me what's wrong. Your face clearly tells me you are scared." Danae stared into his eyes, mesmerized by the intensity of his gaze. She couldn't help herself. She answered, "There's a man on the subway who used to hit on me. The other day, I kinda handed his ass to him. Today, he glared at me as if he might hurt you?" Vincent asked. Danae shrugged. "Seriously, it's not a big deal, Mr. Wallace. I can take a different train." "Or you cannot take the train at all, which is the smarter idea," Vincent replied caustically, the order implied in his voice. "Mr. Wallace, I can handle it," Danae told him, her voice implying she didn't care for his tone. He realized how overbearing he was being, and stepped back with a chuckle. "I'm sorry. I tend to be protective of my friends." "I would hardly call us friends, Mr. Wallace," she answered, a small twinkle in her eye. "Employee, yes. Friend, eh?" Vincent's smile erased the concern. "So you're accepting the job?" Danae's smile widened. "As long as you take it easy, Mr. Protective Man." Vincent smiled at her flirtatious behavior. He'd made the right decision choosing her, but her sweet smile was affecting him more than he would have liked, and the protective urge had nearly overwhelmed him. "I'll work on it, if you'll promise to stop riding the subway," Vincent told her. "For now, that's the only way I can get to work." She turned and headed for the elevator, and he followed. "Don't worry, Mr. Wallace, I'm not." He's harmless, and I'm surrounded by people on the subway. Not when you're walking to and from your apartment, he reminded her, as he swiped the key card for the elevator. Why don't I have my car take you home tonight? I can arrange something until you have time to go car shopping. Mr. Wallace, you are doing enough for me with this job. I can handle my own affairs, and will continue to do so. Her tone implied the conversation was over, and she changed the subject. I'm very excited about the job. Vincent watched her. She stared straight ahead at the elevator doors. The nervousness he sensed in her was not from her early morning adventure with a jerk. The sexual tension had begun building when she'd called him Mr. Protective Man. He stayed on his side of the elevator and tried hard not to stare. Her outfit was professionally sexual, and he wondered if she had done that on purpose. The red was so powerful, so hot, that if her face hadn't shown her emotions, he would have been aroused the moment he saw her. As they stepped off the elevator, Melinda rose from her desk with a semblance of a smile on her face. Good morning, Mr. Wallace Danai. I've set up the brunch in your office, but may I have a word with Danai in private first? Vincent raised an eyebrow at her. Why the secrecy? Melinda stared at him until he succumbed. Fine. You're a tyrant, Melinda. Yes, I am. And I'm about to teach her how to follow in my footsteps. Melinda's carefully made-up face watched him as he walked into his office and closed the door. I assume that you are taking the job? Yes, I am. I hope you approve, Danai murmured respectfully. I'm looking forward to learning from you. Melinda arched an eyebrow. I will be here for another month. In that time, you'll have to learn a lot. But he wouldn't have chosen you if you weren't qualified. The man has exquisite taste. Except in fiancés, apparently, Danai joked. Melinda did not laugh, but a smirk crossed her face before she could stop it. Well, that's neither here nor there. You will have access to all his professional and personal information, so secrecy and discretion is the key to keeping this job. Of course, Danai answered, enjoying the woman. Her personality was a bit hard, emotionless, but underneath, she could tell Melinda loved Vincent. I do have a quick question before I go inside. Ask away. Mr. Wallace said the job required some travel? Danai asked. Really? Melinda thought for a moment. I think I've only had to travel with him twice since I've worked for him. Her eyes appraised Danai, her beauty, her youth, the sexual aura she gave off without trying. You'll have to ask him about that. Danai had seen the appraisal. She leaned close to Melinda. Do you think he hired me for, Melinda's face was blank. He is the most professional man I've ever known. I don't know why he chose you, but it wouldn't be for that. He isn't like that. Her immediate defense was a clear indication of her absolute loyalty to Vincent. Danai smiled at her. I so look forward to getting to know you, and how to run his life. She chuckled, and Melinda smiled again. As Danai walked into Vincent's office, she praised her ability to elicit a smile from the woman. When she stepped inside and closed the door, she looked at Vincent and lost her professionalism briefly. With a thumb cocked in Melinda's direction, she whispered, I made her smile for real. Vincent laughed. That's quite a feat. You'll definitely be able to do this job if you cracked that hard exterior. I hope you're hungry, he said, indicating the buffet set up behind him. Oh, wow, she breathed when she turned. A large table with a white tablecloth sat in a corner with several warmers holding steaming food. She walked to the table and gasped, There's enough food for 10 people over here. I didn't know what you liked, and we have a lot to discuss this morning, Vincent told her. Mimosa? He asked, holding out a flute with the orange liquid inside. On the clock? She asked with a smile. We do things a little differently on the top floor, he chuckled. He picked up a plate and handed it to her. Enjoy. I'm so glad I haven't eaten, she said with a grin. She turned and scanned the plates again. Western omelets sat steaming in one warmer, pancakes in another, and waffles in a third. Bacon and sausage were in a fourth, and there were heaping bowls of fruits and 2 different juices. As she loaded her plate, she said, "I feel like I'm on vacation." "What do you mean?" "This looks like a spread you'd find at a resort," she murmured as she picked her mimosa up and moved to the table. He joined her a moment later and they began eating. Between bites, he asked, "So, do you have any questions about the job?" "Several, actually," she said after swallowing a bite of the most perfect omelet she'd ever tasted. "Why does this job require me to travel with you? Melinda says she rarely did." Vincent paused in the middle of a bite, debating what answer to give her. "Truth. Melinda is married. I didn't like taking her away from her husband." He chuckled after taking a sip of his mimosa. With a wink, he teased, "And he wouldn't have appreciated a young, handsome man taking his wife to a hotel." Danai nearly choked on a strawberry. "Oh my God, I guess you're right." She laughed, but once she sobered, she asked a serious question. "Meaning, no offense, but you didn't hire me because I'm young and single, did you?" Vincent put his hand over his heart, pretending offense. "How dare you accuse me of something so heinous?" Danai looked at him, her eyes narrowed. "Okay, Mr. Smartass, okay. I just wanted to make sure." "I think you are the perfect choice for my assistant," Vincent said with a nod. "Thank you, Mr. Wallace," Danai said. "You're welcome, Danai." For a moment, they stared at each other, the eye contact unbroken for longer than was completely appropriate. Danai felt like she was on a date rather than a meeting with her new boss. The sexual attraction she felt for him was clear in her eyes. She was sure of it. She could see it in his eyes. Danai's lips parted, and Vincent's eyes glanced down, breaking the eye contact. Her tongue darted out of her mouth, lightly licking her full lips in response to his unwavering attention. When his eyes met hers again, his lust for her was so plain in his eyes that she jolted, breaking the trance they had fallen into. Mr. Wallace," Danai began. She wasn't sure what to say, but the silence had lengthened to an uncomfortable time. She opened her mouth again to speak, but the door banged open and a gorgeous woman stomped in, followed by another woman and Melinda. Vincent leapt to his feet. "Gemma, what the hell are you doing?" "Mr. Wallace, I'm so sorry. I tried to stop them," Melinda growled furiously. Gemma glanced back at her with a superior look on her face. "Leave, Melinda. He has no need for his assistant at this time." Melinda literally growled at the woman. "Gemma, you are no longer welcome in this office. Remember that before you try ordering anyone around." Gemma jerked back around to glare at Vincent, pointing behind her at Melinda. "You told her. That was our private business, Vincent." "Private business?" he asked with a raised eyebrow. He indicated the woman who had walked in with her by lifting his chin. "Who's your friend?" Gemma smiled, a cruel, evil smile Vincent didn't recognize. "Tell your assistant and whoever the hell that is," she pointed at Danai, "to get the hell out of here. Gemma, you will show respect to me and anyone who is in my office, or security will remove you faster than you can blink." Vincent's voice was so cold, Danai thought ice would drip out of his mouth. Danai rose. "I'll just excuse myself with Melinda." Gemma turned on her. "Is she your newest whore?" She looked her up and down. "Kinda chunky." Danai's eyebrows shot into her hairline. "Excuse me?" "I don't think I stuttered, bitch." Danai looked her up and down and laughed. "I understand you feel it's necessary to put me down, to put Melinda down because your self-esteem is in the garbage. But call me whore again, and I'll tear your hair out by the roots." Melinda snickered. Vincent laughed loudly, but he could see the insanity rising in Gemma's eyes. Her breathing was abnormal, and he sensed her desire to change. And unfortunately, she wouldn't give one shit about the fact that Danai was human and had no idea shifters existed. He turned to Melinda quickly and said, "Melinda, please show Danai around the top floor. I'll handle me ex-fiancé and her friend. I would appreciate it if you would have Ross join us, please." He walked the women to the door, and once there, He pulled Melinda close. Danai is human, just so you know. Yes, Mr. Wallace, I know, Melinda told him, looking at him like he had no brain in his head. I know the difference, as should that thing in there. Yes, but she doesn't care. Vincent smiled grimly, winked at Danai and shut the door, closing them out. Danai stared at the closed door for several seconds. Melinda took her arm and led her to her desk. Please, have a seat, Danai. I need just a moment to call Ross, and then we'll begin the tour. Are you sure he's okay in there with those two? Danai asked, glancing at the door again. I can assure you, Mr. Wallace can handle that tramp and her friend, Melinda said ungraciously. Who's the friend, I wonder? Danai said out loud. No idea. Please excuse me, Melinda said as she walked down the hall to Ross's office. She briskly knocked on the door and entered after a mumbled welcome. Danai followed her with her eyes, then returned her gaze to the door. The beautiful woman with the terrifying personality, Danai knew, was Vincent's former fiancé. Though she acted as if she still had the right to burst into his office, her thoughts drifted to the moment she and Vincent had shared. She frowned at her easy use of his first name in her thoughts, but she liked the name. I think he was going to kiss me, she mused, putting her chin in her hand as she let her thoughts drift to what that might be like. His lips were those of the statue of David, and she'd bet his body was equally perfect. She pictured his body in her mind, and her heart picked up. She fanned herself with her hand almost playfully and giggled. She put her hand over her mouth, hoping no one had heard her. Working for this man would be an adventure of one kind or another. Vincent turned to face the two women. Gemma wore a look of victory on her face. What are you gloating about, Gemma? She leaned back against his desk and crossed her arms. Hosting brunch for a woman like her? Wow, you moved on quickly. And you pulled from such a low order. A human. Tisk. Your mother will be so disappointed when I tell her. Vincent crossed to his desk and sat behind it in his large chair. Get your ass off my desk, he growled. No need to be rude, Vincent, Gemma murmured as she lifted herself off the desk and sat in a chair nearby. She gestured for her companion to sit as well. Vincent sat in silence, waiting. He had discovered that most people filled silence with needless chatter if he waited long enough. He watched as Gemma began to shift uncomfortable, though the other woman sat still and watched as well. Admirable, he mused, though he had no respect for a woman who would be friendly with Gemma. After several more seconds, Gemma blurted, So tell me about your new whore. She is my new assistant. Melinda is retiring, Vincent supplied, and waited again in silence. Gemma filled it. This is my attorney, Phyllis Underwood. Vincent's eyes widened in mock surprise. An attorney? How refreshing. How are you paying for her now that I've taken your credit cards away? You ass, Gemma began, pointing at him viciously. Gemma, the woman said, placing her hand on Gemma's arm gently. Let's handle this with some grace. Vincent laughed. Gemma's grace ends when she puts on her clothes. Gemma opened her mouth, but a knock sounded at the door. Ross opened it without waiting for an answer. Good morning, boss. Gemma, a pleasure. The sarcasm dripping from his lips was almost visible. Gemma looked away, and Phyllis asked, Who is this? My attorney. I'm always prepared, Vincent told her. She narrowed her eyes briefly, then stood to shake Ross's hand. Phyllis Underwood. Ross Edgar's at his service, he said with a huge smile. He plopped a hip on Vincent's desk. So, what's this about? Gemma again tried to speak, but Phyllis interrupted her. My client has hired me because you have broken a contract with her. You promised to marry her, to care for her, and provide for her, none of which you plan to do. Ms. Garner will be suing you for emotional stress and physical injury in the amount of $50 million. Vincent and Ross exchanged a glance, then laughed loudly. You can't be serious, Ross asked. I'm deadly serious, Mr. Wallace, Phyllis assured him. Ms. Underwood, I do hope your career is solid, Vincent said. his tone having lost all hilarity. "Gemma has given you false information." After a glance at Gemma, who rolled her eyes, Phyllis asked, "False information? I don't think so. I saw the marks on her body." "Marks on her body?" Ross asked. "Yes. When Gemma tried to leave, Mr. Wallace resorted to violence, and she was forced to defend herself with violence. She came to my office the next morning with marks on her body." "Did you take pictures of these marks?" Ross asked. "I did not. They had almost completely healed by the time she contacted me," Phyllis sniffed. "Ms. Underwood, I assume based on your scent you are a shifter?" Vincent asked. "I am. What does that have to do with anything?" "As a lion shifter," Ross took over, holding his hand up to silence Vincent in case he should say anything he shouldn't. "You should be well aware of the fact that lion shifters heal quickly, as long as they remain in their lion form. Even in human form, we heal faster than humans." "I am aware of that. Thank you for the medical lesson," the woman replied smartly. "That does not mean the injuries weren't there." "Any court of law will throw that out, and you know it," Ross returned. "No proof. Now, what was the other issue?" "Emotional stress." "May I tell you the truth, Ms. Underwood?" Vincent asked politely, staring at Gemma rather than at the lawyer. "I told her the truth, you dick. You promised to marry me, take care of me, and provide for me. You heard her," Gemma shouted. "Can you define provide for, please?" Ross asked, his head tilted in a sarcastic manner that grated. "Ms. Underwood, your client maxed out 2 credit cards with incredibly high spending limits. When she asked for more, I refused and we had a fight. That evening, I came home and told her to move out. My mother and I discussed it, and the arranged marriage is over." Phyllis looked at Gemma, a question on her face. She rose with her briefcase in her hand. "Ms. Garner, you have not been truthful." She turned back to Vincent. "I asked her for a copy of the contract the 2 of you signed stating your responsibilities to her and her responsibilities to you. She says you took it and put it in a safe." "There is no such contract, Ms. Underwood, I can assure you," Vincent answered. "I would never have allowed my client to sign such a ridiculous contract," Ross affirmed. Phyllis nodded. "I thought as much. Goodbye, Gemma. Please don't contact my office again." She glanced back at the 2 men. "Good day, gentlemen. I apologize for the intrusion." Gemma began vibrating again as the woman left the office. Vincent sat forward and pointed at Gemma. "If you shift in this office while we are surrounded by humans, I will have you thrown in jail." "No human jail could hold me," Gemma growled through clenched teeth. "My mother's prison will." Vincent stood. "Now get out of my office and out of my life. Do not intrude on my life again, or I'll make damn sure you never see the outside of that prison again." Gemma's fury was a physical being in the room, but she leashed it and rose steadily to her feet. Tears traced down her cheeks along with the mascara she wore. Tears of such unbridled hatred, Vincent wondered if he'd have a mark on his face. She opened and closed her mouth, wanting to say so much, but she couldn't get her mind to work past the fury. She turned abruptly and walked out.
Chapter 7. The lawyer walked out of Vincent's office just as Danai and Melinda returned from the upper floor tour. She nodded to the women and strode purposefully to the elevator without a word. Danai and Melinda exchanged a glance. "What do you think happened?" Danai whispered to Melinda as they reached her desk. "I can't hear anything." The door jerked open and Gemma exited, slamming it behind her. Her face was mottled with red, an indication of her absolute fury. The trails of black mascara looked like tribal war paint, a monstrous caricature of the lovely woman she could be. She froze when she saw Danai and Melinda staring at her, and her perfectly manicured nail pointed at Danai. "You stupid bitch!" Her fury barely contained. Her hand shook as she pointed viciously at Danai, glaring. "Gemma, Ms. Marcellus has done nothing to you," Melinda defended. The situation needed to be diffused. The woman was going to shift. Melinda was sure of it, and in front of a human. She glanced at the office door, wondering why Vincent hadn't followed to make sure the woman left. It's time for you to go. Gemma's attention had turned to Melinda when she'd spoken, but it returned to Danae almost immediately. This human is trying to take my place. I saw the way he looked at her. Human? Danae asked, frowning with confusion. What the hell? Melinda smiled menacingly, her eyes on Gemma. Nothing. She's lost her mind. Please step into the office and tell Mr. Wallace to come out here. Now. Danae watched Melinda, fear in her breast. These two women were ferocious in their demeanor. She glanced at Gemma again, who still stared at her, then moved to follow Melinda's order. Gemma moved in front of the office door. This nasty thing isn't going in that office again, Gemma growled, causing Danae to step back and away from her. She sounded like some kind of animal, and visions of the monster from American Werewolf in London flashed in her head, a movie that had caused more than one nightmare when she'd been a child. Danae lifted her hands defensively. I won't go in there, but I will call him. She opened her mouth wide to call out to Vincent, but did not have the chance to make a sound. With a roar like a tiger, Gemma disappeared. Shreds of her clothes flew in all directions, and in her place was an impressively frightening lioness, glaring at her. The lioness began to pace, her great muscles bunching and releasing, watching Danae the way a predator would watch prey. Danae had frozen, eyes wide. The unthinkable had happened. The woman had become a lion right in front of her. Danae's mind couldn't understand what had happened. Every rational explanation flitted through her mind and was discarded almost immediately. This defied all logical explanation. Terror filled her, and her flight or fight response was not working. Her feet were in concrete, attached to the floor where she'd been standing when the woman had disappeared. Melinda let out a scream, Vincent's name lost in the sound of her fear. The lioness leapt at the same moment, hitting Danae's shoulders and knocking her to the ground. Danae reflexively threw her hands up, covering her head, staring through her arms at the lion eyes and teeth so close to her. When she made eye contact with the beast, it threw its head back and roared, lifting a large paw as if it would swipe across Danae's body. Danae screamed then, long and loud, her mind finally working again. She pushed at the lioness to no avail, and the paw began its descent towards her face. Again she covered her face with her arms, preparing herself for pain. The claws hit her left arm, slicing into the skin, but not deeply. She screamed again, and felt the immense weight of the lioness yanked off her abruptly. With her hand over the wound on her arm, she scuttled back like a crab until she hit the wall and watched the display in front of her. Two male lions stood between her and the lioness, their magnificent manes flowing back over their backs. The lioness righted herself and roared at the two lions, an ear-splitting sound that forced Danae to cover her ears. The lioness paced, her eyes on Danae, looking for a weakness in the defensive stances of the two males. She swiped at both of them, but neither of them flinched. One of them, slightly bigger than the other, stepped forward and answered the roar, more loudly and fiercely. Danae's entire body was shaking with fear. She looked at Melinda, who held her hand up in an indication that she remained still. She returned her gaze to the scene, and one of the males, in less than a second, became Vincent, standing nude in the middle of his office. Danae gasped loudly, drawing his attention, and her mind struggled with the scene before her, the pain in her arm forgotten. He glanced at her briefly, then returned his gaze to the lioness. "Gemma, you have shifted in front of a human. You will go to prison for this," Vincent said, breathing hard in his ire. "Shift into human and accept your punishment." The lioness shook her head as if she understood his order and refused to obey. Danae's eyes widened when the realization of what this meant hit her. They were like werewolves, only lions instead. Her head swiveled between Vincent, to who she assumed was Ross, then to Gemma. She looked again at Melinda, her eyes so wide they looked ready to pop out of their sockets. Again, Melinda lifted her hand in a gesture, silently asking her to be calm. Danae swiveled her head back to watch the trio. Ross had shifted into his human persona as well and stared at Gemma's lioness. "Shift, Gemma. This is ridiculous." Gemma, security is on the way, and the Lion Council will be contacted momentarily, Vincent told her, gesturing to Melinda, who turned immediately to her desk and picked up the phone. Vincent gazed at the lioness again. You're finished, she hissed at the two men, then roared as she shifted, ending the change in her human form, her mouth wide in a scream. She, too, stood gloriously, and Danae thought to herself that they were all three perfect specimens of the human frame, and their lions had been stunningly beautiful as well. What world am I in? She thought as she watched the drama unfold. Gemma stood proudly, her shoulders back, her breasts forward, looking like the model she had been. Her insanity, though, was plain in her eyes, and Vincent wondered if she would shift again. Protecting Danae was his uppermost concern, and to do that, he had to get this woman out of here. Kill her, Gemma pronounced, shifting her gaze briefly to the cowering Danae, who still sat against the wall, blood leaking from her wounded arm. Gemma smirked at her fear. She saw us shift. She cannot live. Wrong. You shifted in front of her purposefully. You exposed our world with the intention of killing a human. That's against the law, Vincent reminded her. Gemma laughed and waved a hand dismissively before returning it to her hip. She's nothing. Your fascination with her is temporary, just like it was with me. I was never fascinated by you, Gemma. You were forced on me by my mother, who will agree that you must be incarcerated to protect not only yourself, but our way of life, Vincent told her. Humans as well, it would seem, Ross added, his smirk clear on his face. He looked Gemma up and down as if she were an annoying child who had no manners. You're going to prison, Vincent informed her as the elevator doors opened behind them. Two security guards stepped out, burly men with arms the size of a woman's thighs. These gentlemen will escort you to our holding facility, where you will remain until the council sends for you. Gemma stared at him, deflating. You can't be serious. I didn't hurt the human bitch. She's bleeding, Melinda commented as she moved to Danae's side to check her wound. Her injuries are not the issue here, Gemma, Vincent said calmly, as the guards surrounded the woman. You revealed our true nature to a human. You will be punished for it. You revealed yourself! Gemma shrieked as the guards grabbed her arms. So did Ross! Why aren't you being punished? We shifted to protect. You shifted to harm. As the guards began to carry her to the elevator, she screamed incoherently, threatening to shift. One guard halted her and put handcuffs on her wrists. Ma'am, if you shift with the cuffs on, you'll break your lion shoulders. You son of a bitch! She screamed back at Vincent, fighting the guards the whole way to the elevator, screaming back at him. Ross followed them to the elevator to make sure she didn't shift, then excused himself to his office, grateful for a change of clothes he kept in there. When the elevator doors closed, the silence that filled the room surprised everyone. Vincent looked at Danae and walked toward her. Danae stared up at him, fear still in her eyes. She jerked away from him when he tried to touch her. Her body was shaking, and she couldn't focus on anything nor speak a word. What's wrong with her? Vincent asked, fearful when she didn't blink. She may be in shock, Melinda told him as she knelt next to him. Lightly, she slapped Danae's cheek. Danae, I know you're scared. Everything is fine now. Danae was still unresponsive. Do we need to get her to a hospital? Vincent murmured. They'll think she's a lunatic if she wakes up and starts screaming about men who are lions. Good point, Vincent said, nodding. He leaned closer to Danae, took her chin in his hand to force her to face him. Danae, please wake up. With no response still, Vincent huffed out a breath and lifted her in his arms. What are you doing? Melinda asked, aghast. I'm waking her up. Bring some herbal tea, please, and some bandages for her arm, Vincent ordered as he sauntered into his office, as if he carried nothing more than his briefcase. He gently laid her on the sofa and debated putting on his spare clothes, but she shifted and her eyes moved. He put a hip on the sofa and leaned over her. Danae, please wake up. Her eyes focused on his face. She let out a yelp, and slithered to the floor and away from him until she could gain her feet. He rose also, standing naked in front of her like some god descended to earth. Her eyes shifted uncontrollably between him and the door and the ceiling, everywhere, making sure she had an escape of some sort in case she might need one. Her panic was palpable, so Vincent lifted his hands in a "I'm not going to hurt you" gesture. "Danai, let me explain what just happened." Danai stared at him, her breathing erratic, her heartbeat so fast and hard she put her hand on her chest. "I think I'm having a heart attack. Does your left arm hurt?" "Yes," she answered, glancing down at the arm, "but not because of a heart attack." The observation calmed her rather than excited her, and she took a deep breath and let it out slowly. The door opened, and Danai skittered to the side away from it, her flight response kicking in. Melinda smiled at her. "Danai, I've brought you some tea." She walked to her and handed her a mug filled with scented tea. She turned and deposited bandages and other medical supplies on the table. "Would you like me to see to her arm?" "No, Melinda, thank you. I'll do it, if she'll let me," he said, looking at Danai for an answer. She nodded her head after a second's thought. "I'll just go then. The front office is a disaster," Melinda replied caustically, looking at Vincent as if he'd made the mess. "I'm sorry, Melinda. I can have someone come clean it," Vincent answered. "I'll handle it. Don't want unnecessary questions." She offered Danai a sweet smile, then walked out, closing the office door quietly behind her. Danai held the mug with both hands, letting the warmth seep into her. Her left arm throbbed, so she looked at it again, amazed at the slight damage the giant paws had caused. It could have been so much worse, she thought logically, as if a lion in a downtown office building was as normal as being stung by a bee. "Would you like to sit down so I can look at your arm?" Vincent asked quietly. Danai looked at him again, marveling at his beauty. His body was perfect, his face a study in concern. "I wish I could paint him," she thought, then giggled at her mind's wayward thinking. She couldn't paint. Vincent smiled at her. "What's funny?" Danai shook her head and moved to the sofa. "Nothing." She watched him warily as he moved to sit on the table in front of her, careless of his nudity. She tried to ignore the incredible cock between his thighs, admonishing herself that she had much more important things to worry about. She moved her eyes deliberately to his and promised herself she wouldn't let them stray again. "So Melinda didn't seem surprised when you changed?" Vincent chuckled. "Well, she wouldn't be. She can also change." He lifted her left arm gingerly and examined the wounds. 3 cuts started at her wrist and slashed for several inches, almost reaching her elbow. "These aren't deep. If properly cared for, you won't even have scars." Danai looked at the cuts. She sipped from her mug as he began to clean them with alcohol swabs. His hands were gentle. "She could have killed me." "Yes, but she wouldn't have," Vincent assured her. He looked into her eyes. "I wouldn't have let her. Is she really going to prison?" "Yes, but not human prison. Lion shifters have their own prisons," Vincent informed her. When she had calmed so quickly, he had made the decision to tell her about his world. He was confident she would be understanding, would be able to handle it, and would be able to keep the secret. If she had remained in his employ for long, she would have found out anyway. "Lion shifter?" She mulled over the words like she'd learned a phrase in Swahili. "Are you like a werewolf, then?" He chuckled as he dried her arm with a soft cloth. The blood was gone, and the cuts looked nasty, but she'd be able to explain them away as a dog attack. "Probably not what you think. Movies have it all wrong for the most part." "What do you mean?" "Werewolves, like lion shifters, can change whenever they want to. They don't have to wait for a full moon," Vincent explained as his capable hands lathered on a salve that deadened some of the pain. She sighed, and he smiled at her. "And like us, they can be killed by regular bullets, though we can heal our bodies if the damage isn't too extensive." Danai's eyes widened, her arm forgotten as her curiosity took over. So if I shot you, you could heal yourself? He chuckled again as he reached for the gauze to put over the wounds. Not if you shoot me in the head, but mostly, as long as I stay in lion form. Wow, that's an amazing gift. Are you born like this? Yes. If I bite you, you won't turn into a lion shifter, he explained as he began wrapping her arm. This is amazing, she mused, awed by the knowledge. I guess humans don't know about you? No. They don't believe we exist. The supernatural world is fictional to your kind. He taped the wrap and smiled up at her. All finished. Danai glanced at her arm. Whatever that salve is, it's completely numbed the pain. Special shifter concoction, he said with a wink and a grin, which she returned. Do you have any other questions? Only about 1 million, actually. He rose with the medical supplies and put them on his desk. He pulled open a drawer and lifted out a pair of basketball shorts. After slipping them on under Danai's watchful gaze, he walked back to her and sat next to her on the sofa. Ask away. As she'd watched him, she realized he moved with the grace of a cat. Lithe and athletic, she couldn't take her eyes off him. And he knew it. The expression on his face was filled with desire, and Danai was sure she mirrored that look. Her gaze dropped to her hands, and she chuckled mirthlessly. You know, I can't think of a single question right this second, she told him. When he shifted closer, she looked up at him. He was so close, so handsome, and so almost naked, Danai's breath caught. He leaned closer, and a question erupted out of her mouth. Can you have sex with humans? The question, spewing out of her mouth at such a quick rate, surprised Vincent, and he laughed. Yes, Danai nodded, her face flaming. Sorry. Don't be sorry, this is a pretty weird thing I'm asking you to accept, Vincent told her. I hope you'll still take the job. She frowned at him. Of course I'll still take the job. I'm not a bigot. A bigot? He laughed again. You are so funny. Like I'm coming out as gay rather than telling you I can turn into the king of the jungle. Danai sniffed. Well, if you came out as gay, I'd still take the job. This is no different, in my opinion, just more secretive. Her eyes met his again. I'm assuming it's a secret. Yes, I'll have to ask you to keep it to yourself, Vincent said. He ran a hand down her arm, over the bandages, and to her hand. He wanted to return to the topic of sex, but she had to bring it up. He didn't want to frighten her, but he wanted her more than he'd ever wanted a woman in his life. He could sense the lust in her, smell the desire she was trying so hard to control. In his mind, he whispered to her, let it out. The feel of his finger lightly brushing hers lit a fire in her belly. Her pussy throbbed with need of this man, but he was her boss. She wasn't sure she could cross that line. Mr. Wallace, call me Vincent, he told her. We've shared secrets now. I think we're on a first-name basis. Sure, Vincent, she replied, enjoying the feel of his name on her tongue. So, I don't want you to think I'm a slut or wanting this out of curiosity, but I have to be honest. She took a deep breath and continued. I want to have sex with you, and not just because you're not human. I've wanted to have sex with you since that morning in the elevator. Vincent smiled at her and cupped her face. No response was necessary other than the touch of his lips to hers. The kiss was tentative at first, then Danai tilted her head and deepened the kiss. Their tongues danced together as if they had been kissing for years. There was no learning curve. This kiss was belonging. When it ended, they stared into each other's eyes. Danai's hands had moved to his chest and remained there, while his hands were on her thighs. The connection was instant and irreversible. Come to my house with me, Vincent said, a question in his tone. Yes, Danai answered.
Chapter 8. Vincent changed into more appropriate attire. The pair would have to walk through the building to his limo. He rang John and asked him to meet the two of them downstairs. As they left, they said goodbye to Melinda, who watched their progress across the room, knowledge in her eyes. After the elevator closed, she smiled to herself and thought that finally he'd found a woman worthy of him. His mother won't like it much. she mused as she threw away a broken vase, chuckling because it wasn't her problem. Vincent and Danae rode the elevator down silently, holding hand because neither wanted to relinquish their hold on the other. When John let them in the limo, he smiled at Danae. When he climbed into the front of the vehicle, he put the partition up to give the couple privacy. Vincent looked at Danae after they'd settled. "You are beautiful. I've thought that since the moment we met. The most beautiful woman I've ever seen." Danae lifted an eyebrow. "So you did hire me for my looks?" He chuckled. "Yes, but I had no intention of doing anything but look."
Oh no. This adult scene has been taken out and is exclusively available for Romancely Audio Velvet members. Check the description below to sign up. The love scene reference is Her Lion Shifter's Arranged Marriage, Chapter 8, Love Scene 3.
"Queen Elaine," Butch gushed. "I didn't know you would be arriving this morning." "Yes, I like to make surprise little visits." She handed a maid her coat. "Where is Vincent?" "He's still upstairs," Butch murmured. "I'll run upstairs and get him." "No need. I know where his bedroom is," Elaine said, her head high as she ascended the stairs. "Wait," Butch called. She looked back at him, an eyebrow raised. "He, has company so soon after the end of his engagement," she tissed, frowning and continuing up the stairs. When she reached his room, she knocked briefly and opened the door without waiting for an answer. At nearly 10 in the morning, Elaine was certain her son would be awake. He had always been an early riser. She didn't care that he shared his bed with a woman. Again, she was sure they'd both be up. To her surprise, the pair were still in bed, looking spent as if she'd barely missed a show. She cleared her throat, and the two jerked up, the woman holding a sheet to cover her breasts. Elaine arched a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Good morning," she said. "Did you forget my visit this morning, son?" "Mother, it's inappropriate to walk into your grown son's room, and it's just plain bad manners," Vincent said. He put a hand on Danae's when she lowered her head in embarrassment. "This is Danae." "Hello, Danae," Elaine said with a smile. "Did you spend the night here?" Yes, ma'am." Elaine's gaze moved back to Vincent. "Is this the woman who witnessed the shifts?" "Yes, Mother," Vincent replied, exasperated. "Do you think we can continue this conversation after we've dressed? I prefer you at a disadvantage." Elaine chuckled as she moved to open the blinds and sat in an armchair near the window. "Young lady, can we trust you to keep our secret?" "Yes, ma'am," Danae answered. "Are you using my son for his position?" "As CEO?" Danae asked, confused and looking at Vincent, who just shook his head in irritation. "No, as future king of the Lion Shifters." "What?" she squeaked, looking at Vincent. "I don't even know what that means." Elaine stared at Danae for several seconds. "You have a lot to learn if you're going to be in his life." She turned her attention to her son. "Is she going to be a part of your life?" "If she'll have me, I plan for her to be in my life for quite some time," Vincent said, kissing Danae's hand and smiling at her. She returned the smile, and for a moment, Elaine thought she'd have to remind them of her presence. "Do you trust her?" she asked loudly, eyeing her son. "Absolutely," Vincent answered after dragging his eyes off Danae. His mother held his eye contact, then nodded and rose. "I'll be waiting downstairs. We'll have brunch. I'd like to get to know your human." "It doesn't bother you that she's human?" Vincent asked, surprised. "I've been waiting my whole life for you to look at a woman the way you've been looking at her the last few minutes. If she's what makes you happy, I'm happy." Elaine walked to the door and opened it. She glanced back. "Hurry up, I'm hungry." She left the room, closing the door with a click. "Your mom is so cool," Danae breathed. "Classy. She's something. I'm shocked she's so accepting of you," Vincent murmured, thinking. "She'll probably interrogate you like a criminal during brunch." "I can hold my own. After a shower, of course," Danae said as she threw the covers off. "I'll join you," he said, grabbing her hips and matching his step to hers, so his body was pressed against her. "You're already hard again," "We don't have time for loving in the shower. Your mother is waiting," she said, playfully slapping him away as she reached into the shower to turn on the water. She stepped inside after the water was warm enough. "She can wait," Vincent said, stepping in behind her and trapping her against the wall, kissing her as the water ran over their bodies. Denai laughed and threw her arms around his neck. "She can wait." The end.